Good evening, everyone. It's September 24th, 2024. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Board of Finance Capital Planning Workshop. Call the meeting to order and ask everyone to please stand for the pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, again, welcome everyone. Before we kick off tonight's workshop, I want to acknowledge the first selectman and the other elected officials who've joined our board this evening, including members of the Board of Selectmen and representatives from the RTM. Thank you all for being here. The members of the public, this meeting is a workshop format to talk about capital needs and planning for the town. We have no voting items, but we will be taking public comment before the board begins its discussions, and the public is encouraged to send comments at any time to the board at bof@fairfieldct.org. Please remember to include your name and address in your email, as you would during live comment if you write to the board. You should also know, the public should also know that capital projects we're going to discuss this evening will ultimately come up as voting items on future agendas, and there will be another opportunity for public comment on individual capital projects at that time. Also, for the benefit of the public, I want to provide an overview of the objectives of this meeting. This is part of the annual planning process where the town administration, Fairfield Public Schools, and the WPCA set forth their 10-year plan for annual capital spending requirements. The town's finance department then walks us through an analysis, which is often referred to as the waterfall, of the impact of that proposed plan on future town bonding and the impact on future debt service, which means the principal and interest payments that will hit our annual operating budgets and our property taxes. One of the key objectives for this board is to understand how the proposed future bonding fits into policies established around debt service limits and into the guidance provided by our external financial advisors. This is important because carefully managing our debt helps our town protect its AAA credit rating, keeps our interest rates on our bonding as low as possible. But just as importantly, it protects our annual budget by allowing us to avoid unnecessary volatility in debt service or significant increases in debt service costs that would crowd out other spending priorities or significant tax increases. Aside from our focus on the overall plan and its impact on future debt service, we'll hear about and have the opportunity to ask questions about specific projects that are in the plan, how they've been prioritized, and how the basis for costs were estimated. But as I said before, we're not voting on anything tonight. The intent is not to take deep dives into each project. We'll have the opportunity to do that when those projects come back before us for approval. So with that said, we'll move through the discussion items in the following order. First, Mr. Gerber, First Selectman Gerber, will take us through a presentation on the process that was undertaken by the town, the key takeaways we should understand from the capital plan and the waterfall, and any open items or next steps. We'll then open up for public comment. And following that, we'll have Q&A for board members and other participants on the overall process and for questions on the town side of the capital plan. On Thursday evening, this Thursday night, we have a similar overview for Fairfield Public Schools, where the superintendent and Board of Education members can take us through their details on their process and their projects. They're not here with us tonight for two reasons. They have a conflicting Board of Education meeting this evening. And also the Board of Ed recently went through the process of updating a long-term facilities plan for the schools. And given the significance of that process, we wanted sufficient time to review all of that on a separate evening. So with that said, we'll move into item 3 to review and discuss town non-recurring capital projects planning document, their timing, and related subsequent bonding requirements and estimated impact on debt service levels over the next several years. First Selectman Gerber, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much to the Board of Finance for giving us the opportunity to present tonight. Big thank you to the staff, Town Hall, Sabrina Bernardi and Eli Gazal. David Becker spent a tremendous amount of time putting this together and have been spending a lot of time ongoing, interviewing department heads, talking through the projects with them, updating projections. It's an ongoing process. They're getting good at it, but we still have a ways to go, and we know that there's technology that we can use, and this will become a well-tuned machine at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future. Thank you to the department for being here. We have the two Johns. We've got Bucky Marsilio, John Cattell. I think everyone hopefully by now knows Michelle Gore, who's our new superintendent of the wastewater of the Water Pollution Control Authority. I mean the general manager of the WPCF. WPC is a liaison to the WPCA. We've got Christine Vitale here, who's select woman. We also, I just want to thank the elected members of the RTM for being here, Peter Britton, Chris Carroll, and my very good friend.
You don't remember his name?
I was like,
thank you for being here tonight. I want to thank Anthony Calabrese and head of Parks and Rec, and Bill Hurley, who's head of engineering. And if we have questions later on, please feel free to ask them of any of the department heads. Can't believe I just had a brain freeze.
sounds like bark.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. Just want to get started. The purpose of tonight, our understanding of the purpose of tonight is comprehensive, to present to you a comprehensive list of projects, all of which are worthy of consideration by the town. The significant changes at a high level, the changes from May 21st, 2024, the financial implications of funding all of these projects, priorities for Fairfield we should discuss, and the parameters that we worked under, and the ones that we kept in mind specifically are that we are not to exceed debt service going over 10% of the expense budget. And that is a longstanding guideline of the town. Now, we do get close in this budget, and so I think that's going to raise some alarm bells, and I think will prompt some further discussion tonight and down the road about priorities. And getting close to 10% really isn't acceptable. We can't be that close because you always need room for contingencies. So, but we are right up against the 10% in 1 year in this budget. And so that's sort of a warning of what we're going to talk about later. We're going to talk to the extent that you all want to next year's capital plan and authorized projects. So the limitations of what the work has done. So we have done, and in particular, the staff has done a significant review with department stakeholders, getting updates on their most recent view of project cost estimates. But we have a goal to implement a rating system for each project, where whether it's ultimately 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, how confident we are in those projects, whether if they've gone out the bid and we've gotten the bids back, we would have something close to a 10. And if we are just putting together project estimates on a piece of paper based on maybe another project that was done somewhere else, that would be closer to a 1. And we've got both in the whole range in this plan. So some of these numbers will change over time, as did the East Trunk line, which doubled, but we have put in some more conservative estimates for some of the projects based on recent feedback. The timing and net costs of the project. So the timing, we all know now, state and federal permitting is fraught. If you want to try to predict the timing, the Army Corps of Engineers, for example, and DEEP, they have backlogs. It can take years longer than you expected. So we are quite aware of that, and we do think, because of things like this, we may be eventually moving projects around on this list, and that's one of the motivations for putting all the projects in this list, because it is in a sense a bit of a moving target as to which projects get started and construction starts first. Grant funding dollars and timelines. So I just want to give a little bit of a shout out to our Eli Gazal, who is running our project management, very small, but hopefully at some point growing project management team. We have a goal of, and John Marsilio has always advised us, and I think he's right, that we need concept level, or maybe slightly more than that, designs of projects, so that when grant opportunities come up, we can submit them for grants. If you don't have a design and you're approached and there's extra money in a budget, state budget, or there's a federal program, if you're not ready to go, you're going to lose out. So there's going to be a push to get designs in earlier and be ready to go when those opportunities arise. At this point, I think we're all very aware of the environmental testing requirements and costs or delays from remediation. An example would be the hardening project at across the street. When you start digging and doing testing, you don't always know when what's going to show up and how bad it's going to be and what the costs will be and how long it'll take to test and remediate. And I think some of those factors have been taken into account on this plan, but it's always a wild card. The quality and number of responses to bids. I believe we all have seen the East Trunk bidding process that was delayed in part because on one, I think it was over a year ago, we got one bid in, and it was really not a qualified bidder. Went out to bid again recently and only got 2 bidders. So the market, in some sense, the market can dictate the speed at which you can start construction. And escalation of construction costs. We've seen this year significant escalations, and the longer some of these projects, if we delay them too long, they'll escalate significantly, and hopefully that will calm down over the coming years, but we don't know. So the assumptions in this plan, or in this analysis, the borrowing rates, and this was discussion with our advisors from Phoenix, 3.25% for fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27, then 3% thereafter. David took the 10-year average of the budget expense increases, and we took that out over the course of this analysis, 2.62% per year. We did not increase the budget, assuming like sort of loading in or backfilling in the interest expense on top of the prior year's budget. So what we're going to show you is essentially borrowing payments that are on our base budget year, inflated by 2.62% per year. And as I mentioned, we did increase the costs of the projects for escalation factors, but so much of that is variable and beyond our control. One thing we did was we took some of the more ambitious projects, for example, the South Benson Road pump stations, which were in the tens of millions of dollars. Pumping, not sewer, this is pumping water out from flooding. This is something that's been on the capital plan for some time. That is over $50 million, and we've moved that out to 2035 because that there's really been no movement on that. So as I mentioned, we have a lot of projects. We've been talking about that a lot over the years, over the past 8 months for I've been here 9 months. And we threw all of the major projects into this plan. They've been in there for the most part since May, at least, the versions of this that you've already seen. But the impact of these projects can be seen on this graph. 2025, for reference, we bonded plus band 42.75 million. In this plan, the peak project costs are approximately 70 million in fiscal year 2031, and then drop off significantly after that. Where does this money going? Just wanted to give you a general sense for the buckets of areas of investment. 17% transportation, sidewalks, and paving. Nearly 50% for infrastructure, police and fire, 13%, parks, 9%. Remediation is still in here for 3%, and facilities, 12%. And this is just the town project, because I think the Board of Ed will present themselves. Estimated bond payments given this level of bonding. So for reference again, 2025 is 25 million. And the peak from, getting to 70 million, just under 70 million, 2031, we have a peak of 45 million in annual bond payments in 2033 in this plan. So here is where kind of probably what you've been looking for. So assuming a 2.62% annual expense budget increase, we have a peak debt service to budget ratio in 2033 at 9.9%. And we understand that's really not something that we can do, and we're going to have to refine this and smooth this out, or even potentially eliminate some things. But this gives you an idea. If we move forward, this is where we would be getting too close for comfort. And on the interest expense front, it shows you this year we budgeted around 7 million for interest expense, but in this plan with this level of bonding, we would be up to about 13 million in interest expense, and that would certainly have an impact on the budget. We do have, we will hopefully still have a debt service fund, and we'll look into in the future whether or not, that could be helped to absorb some of this. Changes to the town project since the last time we went through this in May. The significant ones I mentioned, 17 million for the downtown resiliency projects. which really haven't, we don't really haven't made much progress on that. And then 52.5 million for the South Benson pump station design, construction, and drainage. And I don't believe we've really made any progress on that, and may not move forward. And we'll have to, discuss that in more detail. But there's really nothing to go on at this point. That's been offset by projects that are achievable, fire station renovations. So the fire stations are some of them in terrible shape, and we're doing, instead of piecemeal, we're looking to do, instead of piecemeal renovations, very thorough renovations all at once. The mobile command vehicle replacement, we received a 10-year plan from the Smith Richardson Golf Club that includes repaving, new asphalt pathways and some other things. So some of these will be vetted in much more detail later, and they will, I believe, want to present this directly to you. And then the other, if there's any, here we go, adaptive recreation facility. And I know Anthony's on the phone right now, if anyone has any questions for him on this, but he is in the process of evaluating and putting a plan into place to use what was the pilot house. It's sold in McKinley Elder Home, the pilot house property, to use it for the purposes that it was, originally meant to be used for, which is, programs for young adults and children with intellectual and other disabilities. And he has made some progress on that and sort of is fleshing out a plan. The old Giant Steps building, this is an interesting sort of, I don't know if I'd call it a dilemma, but it's an interesting situation in that we have a building which may have good bones. It's across from where Walter Fitzgerald is in the new site. But every day, every month, every year that we wait to shore up that property, more likely that we at some point will not be able to use that building at all. So we are in the process of having someone look at the structure, first of all, to see if it's salvageable, and if it is, we should at least probably shore that up so that we don't lose the structure to weather. There's many potential uses of that property, and we don't have anything in mind right now. So if you look at the net changes since May, 51 million to the negative, and just went over the major drivers.
Negative meaning?
Reduction. And that is my presentation, and we have detailed worksheets, so I'll leave it up to you. Yeah.
Thank you for that summary. I want to, before we get into the capital plan.
By the way, can I just apologize to Mark? That's never happened to me before, Mark. And you're a good friend, and it's not happened to me. Don't worry about it. I think I just turned 60. I'm turning 60, so maybe that's the problem.
That's the problem. All right, I want to open it up to the board to ask any general questions on Selectman's presentation before we get into the detailed plan. But before we do that, I just want to see if there's any public comment. I don't think there's any members of the public in the room. I don't see anybody online. If there is anyone online, you can quickly put your name in the chat. If not, you can move into Q&A. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any public comment. So I want to open it up to questions from the board or any of our other meeting participants on Mr. Curley's presentation. Mr. Curley.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Blackman. I'm looking at the overall sheet in terms of what you mentioned in the presentation that we're getting. If this were to roll out as it's drawn up on paper, dangerously close to the 10% debt service ratio in relation to operating expenses. And I'm looking at the detail and I see that, and it's the 9.94, and I guess it's 2033. So I guess my question is there a level, since we're not breaching the policy, but you talk about needing wiggle room for unforeseen projects that might need to be slotted in. This is obviously almost 10 years away, right?
Right.
One question is there a level of debt service to operating expense that you would be comfortable? 9.5%, 9%? What's the point in which you get uncomfortable? And then secondly, in that particular year, you've got, if I'm reading the schedule right, roughly $27 to $30 million of proposed projects in that year for debt service related to those proposed projects. And isn't it just at that point when we're approaching it, then smoothing things out? But right now we're at 6 or 7% on that ratio, and why not get started?
I think, I couldn't have said it better, really. There's so much uncertainty in this, and you go through these projects and they all are worthy. And some of them may never happen for various reasons. Some of them may get kicked out for various reasons. And that's why I spent so much time on the variability of this. We should pick a number that we feel comfortable with getting up to, whether it's 8.5 or 9%, that we would not want to go over, knowing that projects, will go over with change orders and things like that. So as long as we know that we're not going to go over,
so
whether it's 8.5 or 9,
but
yeah,
allow yourself some cushion.
then we would then have to smooth the projects out. But they're all going to shift around in reality, as they always do, depending on the environment that we're in, whether or not things get permitted, whether or not the world changes around us, whether or not projects before it are twice as much, even with our escalators in it. That would then push, would impact the projects, other projects down the road. There's so many variabilities now.
Thank you, Mr. Philip. Mr. Stark?
What was the methodology for the budget, for example? Was it just an inflation rate that you applied, or?
I may have started, but yeah, we just inflated the budget by 2 points, the average 10-year increase. So it was 2.62% per year. That's just, we thought that was just a stake in the ground to start the conversation.
We tend to do well with grants. Did you make any particular assumptions that could move this in another direction?
No, we did not assume, and there will be grants, and we just found out about a potential one today, but they're so variable.
This is just our share.
This is what for the ones on which we have not already identified grants, we just assume no grants.
Last for me for now. It begs the question of whether there are things in 2031 that could move into 2032.
Right.
Or not, the way this really needs to be done by.
Well, yeah. So we would, if we actually get there and we're getting too close, we would have to move them.
That's all for me.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola.
When you said, hey, Bill, when you said about the South Benson pumping station, you said there's really been no movement or activity in there. What do you mean by that? Is it?
I've never seen an actual plan on that, but we have Bill Hurley here, probably could answer that better than me. I don't know if Bill.
There as a placeholder and then nothing's really happened.
It's been there as a placeholder.
Are you talking about a specific project or?
South Benson
Pump station.
Pump station,
Yeah.
that's really just a placeholder, because it involves a whole package of the storm system pump station, you know, if water happens to flood the neighborhood, we can pump it out quicker. But it also involves storm drainage, where right now with the rising sea level, a lot of our storm drainage is underwater during high tide. And so that would help get rid of the water quicker on, I guess, good weather days or days right after it rains. So all that is included in the proposal. Doing all drainage lines in that whole neighborhood and the pump station. It's pushed out because it's no expensive and it's a lot of work, a lot of permitting.
So when do you, so you're, no, this is, we have to make choices, so you're okay with pushing it out? When you start doing the actual, say, work to develop costs for something like that and actually go out to bid, is that 5 years out before you wanna actually start the construction? How,
For a project this big, it's probably a good range, somewhere between the 5 and 10 year line. Just to let everybody know, we do have at least conceptual drawings that we have. So if there was a grant in place that we could apply for, and obviously if you get 50% or 75% grant, now all of a sudden it seems, you know, it might be a feasible project.
Mr. Rutolo?
Follow up on his question.
Yes,
while
please.
we're on the subject matter. So basically, we're deprioritizing that project. It should basically be just taken off. We're not gonna be talking it anymore because 10 years from now, it doesn't even make our schedule. So it's completely off the table, at least for now. It shouldn't come back on until someone's gonna make a legitimate argument that first select, I want this on. I'm gonna prioritize it. Because right now, you're talking about a $50 million number that, based on the way price increases have been happening, will be $150 million in 10 years. And we've seen.
That's why it's been pushed back, but we did not wanna take it off, because to be honest with you, you know, one storm or one hurricane, then that could change public perception very quickly. Or as I said before, if we happen to get availability of a grant, it gets put back on immediately and it doesn't surprise everybody by putting it back on.
But it's not on this plan, correct?
I thought it was on the outside fringe, correct me?
It's past,
It's past here, it's not in the 10-year plan.
Not in the 10 years, yeah.
So it's not, so we shouldn't even talk about it, cause it's not even here. It's so far out. We don't need to talk about it.
So downtown resiliency as an example has also been moved out because we are projecting at a minimum $30 million on that. However, downtown resiliency is still underway from a planning stage. That started with ARPA dollars, and most of it's gonna continue with ARPA dollars. The thought process on a project like that is that at that dollar amount for that type of project, it's probably going to be unrealistic for the bulk of it to be funded by the town, but it's an active capital project, and we're gonna be seeking most likely state and federal funding as a significant project. So we didn't wanna take it completely off of the waterfall, because it's a project that we're working through, and then we're gonna be seeking almost entirely essentially grant type funding for it.
So, okay, but for tonight's capital planning workshop, both those plans should not be talked about. They're not on the plan. Correct?
I would agree for the purposes of tonight that those are not things that are substantive
They're
from
presented as a change from what we last looked at in May, and I think that's why they came.
that's why I asked the question.
far
They shouldn't even be talked, I mean,
Just wanted to know why it was taken off from the last time and this, why, that's all, and they've answered it.
and we use the 2035
Yep.
column for that purpose.
I'd like to drill deeper, just so that as we're going forward, I completely understand this and the numbers. A little bit deeper on the assumptions. So let's start with the first bullet. Borrowing rates, you've been told by Phoenix that they're gonna be 3.25. We already have fiscal year 25, we're in that budget year. 26 and 27, we're gonna be at 3.25%. And then from fiscal year 27 thereafter, it should be 3%. So what I'm confused about is how does that tie into the next bullet where it says budget increases by 2.62%? So we're gonna be going up, but you're not adding the interest at those rates, or you are?
One is the actual assumptions for interest costs, which if you went back a year, they were projecting numbers even around 4, actually over 4 for this year. And in both of those years, we were in the 3.3 range. So as a AAA municipality, we were actually, even in the face of the higher rates, we were still on the low end. So this is those rates. The budget growth number, we're projecting at 2.62. That's the other number that you're looking at, and that took a 10-year average.
Can I just interrupt for one second? I'm sorry. We're not projecting it so much as that's how we set our bar or the debt max. So it's not, because you're right. If we were actually projecting it, we would put in the interest expense. Yeah.
So I just wanna be clear, when you say budget increase, it's not the budget increase for debt costs, it's the entire amount of the budget.
Yeah.
General fund.
Yeah.
Because we're compared against our general fund. So they take 356, 775, 787, and then they roll those numbers forward at a projected budget increase number. And we're using 2.62 because that's the 10-year average. And the 10-year average, if you take the high and the low year out, was 2.66. And the 5-year average was 3.154. So we went with the lowest of the three that we looked at from an average perspective. So 2.62 takes.
And Jim,
inflation
do you
and
mind
law.
if I just, for purposes for the public, just so, because I think this point could be confusing. That budget increase number is the number we use to allow us to estimate debt service as a % of budget, right?
Against the
So
general.
every year, the debt service goes up, but so does our overall budget. And we have to assume, we have to make a projection as to how much the budget's gonna increase. Now, 2.62 might sound high because we haven't had mill rate increases that high, but our mill rate, it's not the same as our mill rate because we have grand list increases and everything else.
Right,
The
this is-
pure expense number in our budget, you're saying you've taken a 10-year look back and the pure expense number increase has been 2.62% historically, so that's what you've used to get to this ratio. Thank you. Jim, I apologize, go ahead.
The next bullet, increase the cost escalation factors for town projects. How have you done that, and what escalation factors have you put into these assumptions?
So we worked with every single department, not just asking them to submit numbers and submit years that they believed that they would be cash flow. And with a comment, which is sort of how it has been done in the past. We actually sat down multiple times with throughout all the different departments. And there's going to be a lot of work to be done to continue to firm this up. But we worked with them on any unknowns, we tried to some degree, tried to extract from them. And I can fill in in that process, but we tried to extract from them as many of the possible unknowns in a project that might not have been accounted for, and then to put estimates for those. At the same rate, anywhere that a department that they were not using in some instances we found they were using lower escalation rates. We tried to at least use 5%, if not higher. We took some departments, I would take fire trucks as an example. We've been watching those go up on average almost 75 on the low end, $75,000 a year. And while that might level off now that we're in a post-COVID inflation slowing environment, so far that hasn't shown any signs. If anything, diesel mechanics and fabricators are harder to find. So we actually escalated that all the way through. So you'll see a pumper that used to have a number, I believe around around I think it was 1.4 10 years from now, and that has a roughly $2 million figure from now. So erring, as I mentioned at our meeting last week, erring extremely on the side of caution with the numbers, so it's not necessarily taking every project and 2xing it, but in every instance possible, making sure to increase contingency factors, increase escalation factors, and try to avoid being on the wrong side of it like we've been almost every project for years. So after this, we're gonna be going through rounds of doing the same thing, only with much more of an effort towards trying to quantify, more specific factors, and crossing out the jobs. But for the purposes of tonight, everywhere we could possibly make sure that we were on the more aggressive pricing, to not find ourselves, under projecting like everybody historically has done.
So each project's different when you have an escalation factor.
On average, our escalation factor is 5% each.
On average. Okay. And we go through these projects tonight, if it's above or below that 5% average, can you tell us, please? I'd just like to know what the escalation factor is on each project. That's on a per year basis?
That's on a per year basis, yeah.
Thank you. That's all I have for the assumptions.
Thank you. Ms. Ruggiero?
Just to follow up on assumptions, any projects that we've approved through today, those factored in already, correct?
Yeah.
And then
They're approved and not funded.
so like some of the stuff we just talked about in the last few meetings, the votes, some of the things we saw, some of the big costs go up on, they would be factored in here. Even if we approved it, like if it's just because we are a Tampa factor, that's gonna be approved. And then the other question, how do we build in here, to Bill's point before, if there's a hurricane, or how much room are we leaving if something blows up? Like, how do we cover ourselves from a disaster?
I think.
Well, we can put on an overall contingency. We did not do that on like a bulk contingency on this. So that is, that's something we could do. I don't think we've ever done that, but it's doable. I mean,
Is that part of the, I think Mr. Curley started out saying, we know that that's a risk and therefore we don't wanna be near 10%, we wanna be at some other number, so I think you implied that you'll be looking to.
you would, if that happened and we had to spend a ton of money on capital projects, we would have to adjust it out.
Shuffle the deck at that point in time and reprioritize.
And that's-
Really, it'd be hard to, unless it's getting state funded or something with a national disaster, it'd be hard to anticipate, but that was my next question, was gonna be, have we historically, so the enforcement, so it's consistent.
Historically, even in a post-Sandy environment, we weren't left in a position where we needed to significantly bond our way out of it. FEMA reimburses on uninsured in a larger disaster, public assistance at a minimum of 75%. Some of the larger incidents, they'll move to 90, in the COVID era, they moved to 100 and then added ARPA. So for all the talk about FEMA and their fund, at a minimum, we'll cover 75 uninsured. And obviously we have a significant insurance coverage. While we are self-insured, quote unquote, we're realistically reinsured and insured. So it's not like it's an unlimited amount of money that we would be exposed to.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Penley?
Along the lines of this idea of these contingencies coming up, you talk about shuffling the deck. As you're planning this out, obviously there's gonna be things that are planned out that you can't stop and you have to do, like sewage stuff. And there's things that are easy to shuffle. Talk about how that's set up, but is this designed so that you don't have a year where you're doing just stuff that you can't stop doing, that must be done?
So some of that falls within the cash flows as well. So there's the approval timeline, and then there's the actual cash needs for the projects. So and we have some flexibility in when we actually go on the dollars for a project. So if a project stretches over 3 years, timeline is the actual cash needs. We also this does not factor in that we usually ban 10 to 25% of each year's amount. So even this first year amount, a big chunk of it, probably at least 20% will end up banned and then bonded out in some of the later years. That allows us to smooth out some, but we use it not only for that, but we have to use it for certain projects if there's grant funds involved. Sometimes you have to lay the cash out, then get the grants back. We do that with state on the reimbursement side. So there's a number of factors in here as you get to each year. And as much as the projects may get slotted into a year and approved, even if you look at the projects from this year and the initial projections, if we don't actually need the dollars, and that's something that we're trying to really tighten up because we're sitting on money now that we've bonded for projects, we're trying to avoid that even further. We only bond or ban what we actually need that next year, and we're trying to tighten that up. So that leaves some flexibility in each bucket of a year, and that can swing $5 million when you're talking about that much.
I would just say, obviously, I think you could easily find yourself in a position where there are things you have to do and you can't do the other things. So I wouldn't say it's designed for that not to happen, because it could happen.
The other question I had was back to the escalation assumption. I'm sorry if you just said this, but so to get the escalation factor, you're just looking at trends where particular projects, you're looking at price increases for particular related projects, like you said, fire trucks. But it's not accounting for like what we saw with East Trunk where hey, there's just not a lot of game out there and we're just gonna have to pay more. It can't account for that. Not for double.
For the market forces, like people just not bidding, I don't know.
That's difficult.
It's difficult to project out, yeah, on average, again, it's 5%. We don't know how the market's gonna be in 5 years, speaking contractor wise, whether there's gonna be hungry contractors out bidding, so it's pretty tough to project that.
Mr. Curley.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Couple of observations that I think there's a really healthy discussion, but one of the things that strikes me is that capital projects by definition aren't things that you typically are surprised by. There's a lot of long lead time to it, you know, if a hurricane rolled through and took out a school or something like that, but we're not in the Midwest, it's not a tornado, we're not on the coast of Florida. Not that I think we should bet on not having an emergency, but point being, by definition with capital projects, you tend to have more lead time and you have time to potentially kind of reshuffle things, right? I think part of
Black mold at McKinley School.
yeah, that's a perfect example, right? That's an absolutely perfect example, and that is something that we should leave room for. But I think this town we got ourselves into trouble over the last few years because we were so careful to save capacity for capital projects that we didn't actually move forward on enough capital projects, which if you think about with general inflation being 2.62%, right, versus project cost for capital projects are 5% or more, right? So by definition, we should be trying to accelerate these projects. It's more efficient for the town to spend money now instead of waiting and spending it later. That doesn't even take into consideration the market forces that are causing some projects to double over the course of 2 or 3 years. So when I look at the schedule and see that we're approaching 10%, but we don't get above 9% until 2031. So to me, I think that the issue that this town is facing is actually in Eli's group where you guys need more bodies to actually get these projects through the system sooner rather than later. Spending $1 today versus $1 4 years from now is gonna be a lot cheaper for the town overall. So I'm looking at this list, looking like, okay, what's shovel ready? What can we get in? And how can we get the debt service ratio to total budget up over the next few years so that it kind of levels off and doesn't get to that 9.5%? That's how I'm looking.
And I would add one thing that we are starting to look at. It's not necessarily reflected in this document. I mean, there's just so much time to get there, but we are starting to try to look at what projects what projects may have more rapid escalations. Certain projects, you know, they're more to the trend line, and some of them they're just shooting right through. And in those instances, you know, as this evolves, we may try to prioritize them to level off on that escalation factor. It's not necessarily reflected in this because it's gonna take some time to really get into every project and figure that out, but.
Yeah, I have a question, but I do just wanna follow up on Mr. Curley's statement. I think I agree with conceptually with what you said. I think though that part of the devil's in the details. I think we've got this 2031 number because we've got a school in here. And it's not like we can accelerate that to tomorrow even if we want to. So some of these things, you know, it's gonna be 2031 until several years of bonding is fully baked in on a couple of large projects that have not been started. And that's, I think, what happens here. But I guess my question, and that I think one of the really significant assumptions that's in here that we didn't talk about at all is the is where the WPCA projects get paid out of. So maybe just let me ask my question and then we can figure out how to talk about this. But on the summary page, we've got WPCA projects of if I'm reading this right, 117 million over 10 years. And out of that amount, the only portion that,
Pages.
Page you on?
so this is the summary page. Okay, so, and for the public, so this would be, it says Town of Fairfield Capital Plan, and what this page does, it's kind of color coded, but it's the roll up of all the numbers, and it summarizes the town spending, the Board of Ed spending, the WPCA spending, right? Yeah. So it might not be on the top of your packet, but
After page 18.
it's
It's down the bottom box.
yeah. So if you're on that page, okay, does everybody have it? Yeah. Great, so the bottom box there, and I, first of all, I wanna thank you know, the administration for this format. We had asked for this. I think this roll-up is very helpful because everyone will notice that the totals on this sheet flow right into that waterfall model. We don't have those, you know, generic averages of money to be bonded. The amounts to be bonded each year on the waterfall sheet flow directly from here. And this is a summary of all of the bonding for Town Board of Ed WPCA. But on the WPCA, which we've included a separate analysis on the bottom, WPCA funding breakdown. So WPCA total projects over 10 years looks like on the bottom right, 117 million, is that correct? Okay. Out of that 117 million, the only amount of that that's in the town funded line item, that, you know, that affects the 9.9% and everything else, is $34 million, right? Or no, actually, 34 million plus 13.5, right? Okay, so 13.5 based on what we approved a week or two ago. And then 34 million of future projects that you have assumed will be paid for by the town. So 117 million in total, and roughly, you know, call it 50 of that is paid for by the town, and the rest has to be absorbed by the WPCA. So that's a big assumption, because that assumes that the WPCA can absorb that amount of debt, absorb that amount of debt service to charge back to its ratepayers, and still be a self-sustaining fund. If it's not a self-sustaining fund, then our rating agencies won't, you know, we have to put that back in our waterfall, right? So can you just And I realize these are, excuse me, estimates, but can you talk about the thought process of how, two things. One, how you did the split between the town and the WPCA. And two, how are you confident that the amount that you've allocated to the WPCA to pay for can actually be sustained by them?
So, this of probably all of the items would be the one that I would consider the most of a work in progress. Spoken about this a lot at this point. Others, there's definitely, numerous discussions probably still to be had about, is it, the methodology in determining what is paid for by the town when it comes to WPCA, whether they can afford it or not, right? There's sort of a number of pieces there. There's a few different numbers. We've done some attempts internally to calculate out what threshold would grow their rate increases to a point where they'd be significant versus, yes, they would be higher and they'd be catching up and bringing them closer to what WPCAs are paying. The WPCA also has some members who, and there's a few different versions that have floated around. They've done a similar set of calculations, trying to figure this out. It's generally landed in the 70 to 80 million range.
That they can afford over 10
They can
years.
afford over a course of 10 years. The methodology for doing it this way right now was largely that they have significant needs right now and their needs are getting more and more expensive. And at the same token, the concept that the town has significant needs, including trying to put them on the short term. So if we started that split too early versus having to go to the WPCA and then later on our waterfall is very front loaded. So if we added all the WP, like a 50-50 split, let's say, and you did it starting now, it would bunch up we'd go through that 9% and then some. So the town can't do what it needs to do in the next, say, 5 years, while also splitting starting at the beginning. At the same rate, the WPCA has a lot of capacity because it has a very small amount that's going towards that service now. So you can put it onto them early on. It also, as you'll see in the waterfall schedule, does not hit them immediately. It takes time for all those principal payments to actually cascade through and build up into the payments, so they can be slowly stepped into it. They also have a $17 million roughly capital fund. There's a few different concepts, their fund balance. One of the concepts is to just pay for a project and have it come off. I know I've spoken, at this board and at the WPCA and about the concept of using that to offset some of their increase, so they can slowly draw that down as an offset, similar to that the administration and this board has done on the town side. And that would allow them to phase some of that hit in a slower period of time. As you get to the later years, we have less town side bonding, and that would be when we could pick that back up in our schedule. So same, if we were to front load it early on, it's not that it would take year one immediately up to 9, but it would definitely cause that to happen a lot sooner. So in this modeling, we put it later.
So you did that, so that the split wasn't based on the nature of individual projects, it was just for practical purposes, we need to use their capacity first, because otherwise it gets the town front loaded.
Yes.
Do we, and I know Ms. Vitale is from the WPCA, but procedurally / legally, do we fully understand the process of how that is gonna work? Does WPCA have to vote on this, agree on this? Is it gonna be a year by year thing? What's the status of their financial planning that allows them to support that $70 million number? I realize it's a work in process, but we've been trying to get to this with them for a couple of years, and one reason or another, it hasn't happened, just in anticipation of all these big projects coming. So what are the next steps to put a finer point on all of that?
So on the payment side, we enter into MOUs. What we did for this, like the East Trunk as an example, there was an MOU that was built into the resolution, so the Board of Selectmen has now already approved it. In fact, bond council today sent an email to pass the RTM for the first selectman and their chair to sign that MOU. Once that MOU is in place, it locks in that they'll be paying their portion of
That one project. I guess I'm more thinking on a broader perspective. Is the WPCA on board? Do they understand? Are they understanding that this is gonna be in their numbers going forward, and that they have to think about rate setting going forward to accommodate this? I guess that's my question.
I think this is definitely going to be a work in progress. We have Michelle Poor on board now, general manager of WPCA, and we are going to have to help support her in developing a robust planning process, because it doesn't really exist right now. So they for a long time sort of relied on one of the board members to do some things, and we need to professionalize that. And not sure exactly who is going to do that, but we'll have to support on that. In terms of whether they statutorily they have the ability to vote things down. So so far we haven't run into that on the East Trunk or but they will always, I believe, always have the ability to not approve some of these things. So we will have to work together on that.
So if they were to not approve something and the town didn't have the capacity to pay for it, the project could not happen.
Right.
All right, I appreciate that, and I know it's been a work in process. I think it would be great if we could set some type of targeted date where we could get an update on that, given that it's such a big number and it's such a big risk factor. I mean, it's such a big assumption in here, because again, I think that could, blow the plan a little bit out of the water. I'd also like to just get confirmation from our advisor. Mr. Spurndle was, I think, clear in speaking to us that when when you all go through the process with the rating agencies, with him, that you could in fact exclude this WPCA debt from the town numbers if you could demonstrate that they were self-sustainable. But I would like to just better understand what that means. What kind of plan does that take? Is that just an assertion that we make? Do we have to provide a plan? Would it have to be a plan that was voted on? Because if not, I think I'm just not clear what it would take for us to do that. And to be fair, we've never been in this territory before. Because I think in the past, we've always just assumed that we've always included the WPCA debt in the town waterfall, which kind of didn't make any sense. But if we're not going to include it, we should understand all the elements, all the issues associated with not doing it, and make sure that we get shored up and we have the right plan, if that makes sense.
And I'll pass that along to WPCA. Since I've been on this board, we have not had this robust discussion, as you well know, with changing administration and just the town departments, DPW taking a more active role, looking at what the actual costs are of the project, a renewed focus on the I&I. A lot of that work is being done right now, and we haven't gotten down to the financial planning right now, just in part trying to get the background information and changing leadership, both at the town level and
I think Mr. Ward has a question, but just from a resource perspective, the WPCA, I'm not talking about board members, but are there dedicated financial resources, or is it just you're relying on the town finance department? So, yeah, okay, just wanted to confirm. Jim?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've been kicking this down the road on how we're gonna finance this thing for a long time. Talk about having special meetings or doing, I think we really gotta do it. It's really gonna be this board that decides how we're gonna finance the stuff. And we're gonna have to invest time, and that means meetings, specifically on this item. Precedent, we're like the new treatment facility 25 years ago, whenever that was paid for by the town body. Repairs was paid for by WPCA. I have no idea where this is going with rates. I mean, I think last year's rates, anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, I thought they went up by like 8%.
You mean sewer bill rates? Yeah.
I think that's,
I think it was
like 8%.
a couple
A
years.
lot of people,
Did they just vote this year on, did you just?
Yeah, this year was,
I'd say this year was less than.
no, but last year was, I believe, it was catching up, you know.
We just.
They not raise their rates in a few years?
That's it, their rates, if
Yeah,
you.
they did it
benchmark-
something like 8%, I believe, last year.
If you benchmark them against neighbors artificially low.
we gotta figure out where that's gonna go. 'Cause, you know, we push all of this stuff onto them. You can't make it unsustainable. So we've gotta really start doing our work on these numbers and figuring out what we're gonna bond and what we're not. And what part WPCA is gonna be responsible for, what is the town gonna be responsible for? We're setting precedent here, and it shouldn't be like every project. We'll see how this project goes, but it's different than the next project. We have a global plan on what I'm doing based on the numbers as we see them before us. And we gotta spend some time doing it, and it's gonna take multiple meetings, special meetings just on this, and I think we should start soon.
What do you think, I mean, given, I know you guys have a lot on your plate. If, for follow-up discussion on this, what do you think makes sense, given that, you know, budget season's only a few months away? I mean, would you be ready to talk about this in December, January? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I would like to sit down with Michelle Gore and John Marsilio. You know, first of all, I think John Marsilio's put a ton of work into this. We, you know, has really stepped up to help lead the capital, you know, plan on this. So we need to sit down and sort of start running through how we want this to work and who, you know, how much support they need, what type of reports we need to produce regularly, and get back to you on that. But
Yeah, no.
I think it has to be a collaborative, you know, discussion.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yes, of course.
So we worked a lot in the past 5 or 6 months on the capital plan and refining that and making it real. We have more work to do. But I would say this, there isn't a more fertile area of this town that can and should access grant money on the federal level, Clean Water Act, money, all of those funds. City of Bridgeport just got $242 million for their treatment plants, for renovation. Now, they're a distressed community, I get it, but there is money out there. And my philosophy is, I've done it before, put your money in the plans, have the plans ready. Alert your federal lawmakers that we're ready to go, we need money. I've been very successful doing that in the past. I think that's what we should do now, invest in the planning piece of it. The other thing that's missing, this is something for David and Bill to ferret out. There has to be a financial component in the town's finance department to work with WPCA on on these matters, operating budget, capital budget, all of it. All things that document that's going to forecast where your rates are gonna go. That hasn't been done. It's gonna be a component of a capital program, what the town's gonna contribute, what we foresee as whatever operating escalations there's gonna be. That needs David and the finance department to have someone who can focus on that, be assigned to doing that. That's a really important component of it. It's been in the past, done by a volunteer, best efforts, but it was just a piece of everything we have on the table here. So you're right about requiring the capital project management capacity, right? And saying that you need a financial capacity, and we still have work to go on the actual capital plan. So that's what I have to say. And let's put some money in the design and be ready and push. And there are big pots of money to help us out here. So this 117 million, you never know what that would be.
Thank you. So right now we have Sabrina, who's been dedicated to this, but that's not, are you saying that's not adequate to you need a dedicated resource, or what do you?
I think you need a half a person just to deal with WPCA, with all that goes on, with collections, operating budget and capital. Sabrina could handle the capital budget. But when it comes to rate making, you need someone to crunch those numbers and come up with besides this shows future borrowing, future rates to address this borrowing. I think you touched on that, Jamie, so.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
We're done with the presentation. Should we turn on the cameras for the public and FairTV?
Sure.
Do you want me to close this out?
Stop sharing.
Stop sharing.
Stop sharing.
I think
That green button.
There you go.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Marsilio. Ms. Ruggiero?
So just as a follow-up to that, and what Mr. Walsh was saying, when we hear like 260 million Bridgeport's getting or something, it sounds like, I mean, that sounds fabulous, obviously. So do we have, my question was gonna be to, I think what you just asked, with like the right staffing, but it sounds like from what he was requesting, Mr. Walsh, with having a special meeting, I think that we should discuss that staffing as all part of that. Because I'm gonna guess we don't, because I know how tight the resources are at town, in the town, and to ask somebody to take that on, we could be losing a lot of opportunities. So I think it's definitely worth, not that I wanna have more meetings or recommend them, but I think we have to. And include that aspect. This would be very helpful.
Yeah, one of the things, I appreciate that. One possibility too is that depending on how much we foresee in terms of meetings, et cetera, is to try to have a committee structure on some of this. Which is something I appreciate anyone's thoughts on. Sometimes just to get to the nitty gritty, because we did talk about, Ms. Ruggiero and Mr. Curley and I talked about convening the fund balance committee to talk about some of these broader issues, fund balance, debt service policies and all that. But there are some broader issues here, including what Mr. Walsh mentioned, and I agree we have to do that. We have a very full schedule going forward. It's hard to do a lot of special meetings. The budget's gonna be on us before we know it, so it might be helpful to try to have a committee to work through some of this. So I don't know if any board members have thoughts on that, but
No, it's a good one.
so anybody that wants to volunteer, otherwise I can just ask you. But I'd appreciate your thoughts too on the best way we can work together. I don't wanna, I don't wanna step on your toes, because I know that you've gotta do management has to do its own work. You've gotta figure this stuff out without us inserting ourselves. I think we have a different role, but maybe we can have some discussions about that and figure it out.
I agree on the staffing concerns. I don't think that we have, I mean, we've raised the concern already. Even just within the finance department, that we do not have adequate staffing for a number of functions, things that have come up in the audit and whatnot that we're just absolutely not. Right now, we have a financial analyst that is not 100% on capital, but as capital has grown, that percentage of their time has significantly been moved into this direction. And while we can do some of those forecasting, I mean, for WPCA, we have been, we fragment out some of what we do when we put them on those items. So if they were, if we end up in a discussion where WPCA is gonna pick up the costs on a partial FTE, that would be something that we certainly welcome. It would maybe give us a pathway to take half of an FTE and half of another FTE on the town side and end up with a person that, now we've a couple objectives. I'm all for, fragmenting some of the responsibility, save overall dollars and meet the objective. As far as, just question about the meetings, however, the Board of Finance ultimately decides whether it's the full board or a committee structure, putting to bed, from my perspective, some of this WPCA, and I think everybody else, that would be, every meeting we go to in the WPCA comes up, including, recently just at the RTM, there's a lot of viewpoints on this overall issue. And just putting it to bed. One thing just from a timing that I would ask would be, if this is in some way going to hold up our town side, then I would want to accelerate it. If we recognize that the town side items won't be at this time, but we need to get this done, let's say by spring, then don't rush it, take the time to get it right. At this point, we've spent almost 15 years talking about it, so another 6 months isn't gonna, to get it right would be, or with buy-in, would be helpful. But we do plan on the town side, I think, to bring a lot of these projects forward even a little bit earlier than historically, to get them kind of not as crunched up in the budget timeline, and also to give some time to go out to bid and to plan. So we're ready to accelerate. So that would just be a point of concern.
Well, maybe what we can do is, since we talked about convening this fund balance committee, maybe that committee can start and then maybe figure out where we go from there, and like to, include Selectwoman Vitale. Sorry to volunteer you, but I think it would be good to have, Mr. Becker and, all the right parties involved, just so that we understand what the objectives are, what we need to get to. Yeah, I think Matt Spurndle has a role, so we understand what the expectation is from a financial standpoint and what we have to be prepared for external parties, et cetera. So, okay, so I'll take that on, and and we can have an update on that at our next regular meeting.
We have a grant person now.
Somebody being hired, or?
So our grants person was a part-time person and she resigned. So we're in the process of trying to hire somebody. That's been posted.
Based on the WPCA volume of dollars coming out, and Mr. Marsilio said about the availability of grants, it would seem to me that it might be time to go to a full-time grants person and have half their time being spent on WPCA grants.
Yeah, we are posting for a full-time person, yeah.
Thank you.
And would that be for WPCA grants as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, combined.
All right, so other questions on the overall process before we move on to the capital plan? No?
Well,
Carol,
Sorry.
not Mark McDermott.
Chris Carroll, District Eight. Bill, is there a criteria before we start looking at these projects? Is it who screams the loudest? What determines what gets into the process? Is there, again,
It's a process of bringing things forward that, you know, making the case, department heads, you know, our engineers, bringing things forward and making the case that these things have to get done, essentially. And so there are certain things like the WPCA that has been a topic for a while, and you know, so I discussed them with Bucky, and we got a report done by consultants and based a lot of this plan off of that. They rank things like, if you don't do this, like you will be in trouble with it, you know. So there's some of that, but for some of the other things, you know, people bring forward ideas and they make sense. For example, you know, most recently, the Golf Commission, we've been working on a second 10-year plan now for some months. And they brought it before us. We haven't fully vetted it. So, but you know, if you're going to maintain your golf course, you're gonna have to do certain things to keep it in shape, and it just makes sense. So it's essentially department heads, sometimes members of the public, sometimes, for example, for one of these things was a priority of mine, but it was based off of people coming in talking to me about a need for young adults with special needs, you know, sort of having a place that used to be used for training and sports and things like that. It's really varied, but it's the whole range of must do through like looking around at other, you know, other towns in this state and other states and seeing where we should be prioritizing certain things. I mean, it's you know, and then for many of these projects, you know, Bill Hurley or one of the engineers, they put together a 14-point plan, which you've probably seen over the, you know, years, sort of explaining the need for some form of infrastructure improvement, a bridge, you know, a street, you know, put the rationale together, and we can look at that and you can look at that and, you know, agree or disagree. That's important.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Mr. Penley?
I just had a question, a follow-up on the grants. It's like a grants coordinator. How many grants are you guys going after? And what is the dollar amount? And basically my question is one grant person enough? And I'm just thinking about I have some peripheral knowledge of grants departments and how understaffed they usually are, and like one maybe isn't enough, but I just don't know how many you're pursuing on a regular basis. I'm assuming it's a lot, and I'm assuming it's a pretty big dollar amount, but I have some knowledge which goes on, for example, in universities, and it's one sounds.
So we're looking to increase the manpower by 100%. But I would imagine that we could have 1.5. We could probably have a senior and a more junior person, but I think we need to start with a really solid full-time grants person, and if, you know, and then sense whether or not because a good grants person, you can easily make the case that there's a return of X on them. So, you know, that's not something that I would be shy about, like coming back to you, but you have to understand for many of these grants, Bill Hurley, like, you know, a lot of these grant opportunities do not actually come through the grants manager or coordinator, and a lot of the work that goes into managing the grants, really, you're looking at them right there. So, you know, a lot of it's technical. So, you know, you can't necessarily say, oh, you know, we doubled our grants, because a lot of that would be because, you know, something came through engineering or something came through PD or FD or the health department, where they're out there looking for grants as well. So for something like WPCA, I definitely think there's huge value add, because I'm not sure that people were out there really pushing for that in the past. But you know what I'm saying, it's not, I think you can, you know, look at the history of where our grants came from and whether we're getting new grants. I think someone like Bill would say, you know, if we wanna go for federal grants, then you need manpower, because they are a pain. It's a lot of work. So we may have avoided certain federal grants. If we had more manpower, we might be able to go for some of them as well. But we do get a lot of state, you know, grants. So, and a lot of that does funnel through the departments as opposed to the grants coordinator.
I mean, look at the job description, what we're looking for in the full time. And those chief of staff has put a lot of effort into that and going to people like Bill and you know, literally, and walking through where the pinch points may be in that, and looking for more than just, this isn't just a grant writer, this is a grant, what somebody actually gonna overall you know, manage that process through and through, and try to help you know, folks like Early and others in those pinch points. So this is a little bit more you know, a little bit higher level, and it's a little bit broader, and start with that one and then see where that goes. I mean, at one point we had 0, so we went to half, now we're going to full. But you make a good case.
No, okay, I we don't need to get bogged down, I just had a question. Thank you.
I just, you know, just wanna reiterate I think Bucky, the 200 plus million grant, that was a federal grant, right? So, you know, that's the kind of thing that will require someone good to help really be on top of it, because it would take up all of your time probably doing that.
Well, just to let you know, we currently have about, between DPW and engineering, about 30 grants. Bill said most of them are state grants, there's a couple that are federal. Most of the more federal, there's more money, but there's more paperwork, more manpower involved, and that's the shift I think the administration's trying to go for now.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Penley. Okay, so if we just shift to Q&A on the capital plan, and again, just to reiterate, we're not gonna take deep dives on each project, but I you know, I'm sure there'll be some questions on the individual ones. I do wanna pause for a moment on this summary though, just for the public and for everyone here, so we can focus on the magnitude of what we're looking at. So according to this summary sheet, we have and I wanna make sure, you know, I'm quoting the right numbers, but over this 10-year period to be bonded on the town side, town alone, 228 million, right? 228,471. We will
I think you wanna back out that fiscal year 25 one, because we're gonna take most of that.
okay.
So, I mean 30, but
I mean, there's not question, some of the fiscal 25 obviously we've already approved, but just the to be bonded.
35.
Oh, I'm sorry, so just take out the
Yeah, so
take out which number then should I look at, the 206 million?
So if you're looking at the 228 and the, you know, the 468 and then going down to the 586, so much of what's in 35 is.
So what's the right total of the 10-year plan then? Do I have to manually subtract that, or is
Yeah,
it?
it's roughly 141 if you take the 87 out of the 228, and that would be.
But that number's not on this sheet, right? So 141 million of projects that are in the town plan that we'll look at. Okay, so then if we do the same thing on Board of Ed, and this, we're not gonna talk about this tonight, but for Thursday, they have
235, cause you're only taking 5 million.
235 million for 10 years for the Board of Ed. And then the WPCA has the 117, right? So we've got 117, 235, and what did we say the town number was? 141.
On the town portion, you'd actually add in 141 up top plus, do you wanna add in the portions of WPCA that we?
No, I get it, but just in total, the reason I'm going through this is in total, this is $500 million, $493 million is what we're talking about. Okay. All right, so for purposes of that, for tonight, we're gonna go through any questions. So this is a roll-up, of course. And the projects are on the following sheets, but we'll go through the two pieces. 141 million for the town, the 117 million for the WPCA. So that starts on the next page, which I think is labeled page 1 on the bottom. So how do you suggest we do this? I mean, I can ask if we can go page by page and board members can ask questions on anything on the sheet. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah,
at the same time, Mr. Becker, Mr. Gerber, if you wanna point out a particular project on here, you can do that.
and I would note, if you start on page 1 of the plan, it's the town approved, town side, open authorized projects, so what you'll find is projects that's all already been approved. Numerous projects have already either been banned or responded. You notice there's a fair amount of 2026, cause it's planned continuing to work.
Okay, so we don't wanna start on page 1 is what you're saying?
You can, I mean, you
No,
will
no,
see.
no, that's okay. Okay, so this is, the reason we have open authorized here is that we've already approved these, but they haven't been bonded, so the numbers have to be included so that they flow up into the bonding schedule. So if we get to the future projects, that's on page what? 4? Okay. So if everyone goes to page 4, starting, towards the bottom, so that would start with the town non-recurring capital, less than 1 million to be bonded. Okay. Any questions on page 4? These are some smaller, so these are for the benefit of the public. The projects that are under 1 million, they're just grouped together because usually those come up for approval and approval vote on a designated night. Anybody have any questions on page 4? Okay, page 5. Mr. Becker, Mr. Gerber, if there's anything you wanna point out here. I see the Smith Richardson one, new one in there. Anything you wanna point out?
I would just point out, and Smith Richardson is a good example. You'll find in a lot of these smaller projects, that it's implementing plans, mentioned, from Representative Carroll's question before that, how do we come up with it? Some of this is, they're all long range plans, right? So it's the golf course, the fire trucks, you've got, Parks and Rec has long range plans, big and small. And then you also notice a lot of these smaller projects are those design funds that we spoke of. Certainly trying to put a lot of dollars in making sure we can design them, it'll make us competitive on grants and be more realistic when we come to the projects. So doing earlier design funds is an approach we're taking.
So maybe, so this page has a number of new projects here, which a bunch of these are Parks and Rec. Does any board members have any questions for Ms. Calabrese or
Anthony's on, yeah.
Mr. Curley?
Sure, I don't have a specific question about the projects, I just wanna make sure I understand the format. So, I'm looking at page 5. See, a lot of these projects, the starting spend is fiscal year 2026 bond. Does that mean that these projects wouldn't start until July 1 of 25 at the earliest? Trying to understand the timing.
So, they come up for authorization, once they're authorized.
They come up for authorization this
They
spring.
come up for authorization this, I would say by the spring, we may try to come up a little bit sooner. In winter, so they have time for planning purposes, right? These projects all have to get bid out and whatnot and then start. And once they have the authorization, they do get an account opened and they can begin to spend on them. It gets spent against the town's overall pooled funds and liquidity. However, really before they get underway in earnest, that we would on
July 1st, 26.
Got it.
So they could start this spring.
they could start, so they could start the process with some minor seed money, and they could get it out to bid so that, they take, obviously there's payments, timeline, and things like that, and that's some of what we're trying to work.
But if, for example, and I'm just randomly picking this, the Veterans Park tennis court rebuild. If there was an opportunity to get that done in March, start to finish,
Would
I could
technically
do that. Okay.
bond it.
Just,
Once it's approved,
yeah, I understand, I'm just trying to
We have a
understand.
lot of liquidity because we've bonded and banned out on items that haven't necessarily started yet, so the town does sit on. That does affect, when they spend like that, it will affect our investment revenue, because remember, it's out of that bucket that we're technically making a little bit on at this time.
As long as it goes through the approval process, they can
Yeah,
start,
and-
they don't have to wait until.
No, and that's one of the thoughts, is you take a project like that, they could have that wrapped and live in May and cut a final check to a vendor in June, and we're bonding and getting the money only a few weeks later. That spread timing gets it live, and we're trying to do that, yeah.
Mr. Riddle.
Just on the development, it says here that it's still being developed. I guess, so the intent is to bond for that, right?
This is similar to the plan that wrapped up 5 years ago.
I thought we, am I wrong, did
Yeah,
we
that
pay
was
for that out of the
good.
operating budget, $100,000 every year? No?
No,
No, it wasn't? Okay,
no, went into non-recurring.
that's fine. Gotcha,
And-
okay.
And the golf commission has met and finalized their plan, so I think the comment with respect to plans still being developed really pertains to going through the bodies for
Process,
approval.
okay, that's
Yeah,
And,
and they've asked to come early, like next couple of months, find a slot at the boards and sort of present that, so it's not sort of just.
yeah, but they're done with their piece.
That's it.
Mr. Walsh?
About halfway down the page on page 5, this fire department Marine 217, I mean, we just bought $1 million boat, how many boats do they have? Maybe, or what the heck is this?
They have 2 boats, one of them is a larger craft that is in South Benson Marina. They also have a much smaller craft that is in, it's at Yacht Yard down in Southport Harbor. They've had, in fact, that boat there predated a larger one. They've operated with them similar to PD where they have a larger and smaller. And this has been on the waterfall schedule and part of their long range replacement. The boat actually has throughout this season numerous times had to come out of service. It's aging, it's actually like a rigid hull type boat, and it's having issues. So we did not, just because of the replacement of the main one which sank and we replaced, we didn't move this out further, we left it exactly where it's always been.
How many communities like around here have multiple boats? 'Cause I know Westport doesn't even have one, right? 0, zilch. Right? So how many communities have multiple, fire departments have multiple boats?
Survey what everybody has, but the Fairfield Fire Department for the past decade has had 2 boats. So we would like to change that and reduce the number of boats. And I would recommend not replacing this, and when that boat ages and can't be in service anymore, you has had 2 boats for 10 years now.
It seems like the new boat, over $1 million boat, gonna have over 1,000 horsepower. Most boats I know that have 600 horsepower, 700 horsepower, 800 horsepower, can go 55 miles an hour on the water. Our boat, I presume, can go 70 miles an hour. Well, I wouldn't recommend a third engine either, but that's what they wanted because of something to do with some hose system.
I recommend that, well, the boat either goes backwards or stays stationary, but yes.
So it just seems as though how much resources are we putting on the waterway? You tell me, if you can find out how many other communities have multiple boats, because they all come with repair costs. Like we're seeing $350,000. And they all come with maintenance costs and gas costs and insurance costs and everything else that goes along with it. Just begs the question that we're spending over $1 million now to get a boat. And now we have this other boat that, to be quite honest with you, I didn't even know we had, to be honest with you.
Okay, so I think you heard the comment, so before this comes up for any funding requests for approval, be ready for that and evaluate.
More than happy
Is that
to.
fair?
Thank you.
All right, other questions on page 5?
Yeah, so we hear from Anthony Cal, there's a lot of playgrounds. I thought we had handled a lot of playgrounds. I thought we had just handled a zillion playgrounds with the ARPA money.
All right, Anthony, you heard the
All of a sudden,
question.
there seems to be 15
There
more.
is.
There seems to be 15 more playgrounds. I mean, they're all
Welcome,
24 months.
All right, welcome, Mr. Calabrese. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Anthony Calabrese, Director of Parks and Recreation. Yeah, Jim, to your point, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30 playgrounds in our inventory. We did replace, I think, 9 over the last 3 years. So we have a number of them that still need to be replaced. So that's what we're doing. You know, we try to plan 10 years in advance, so we've spread them out over you know, the next several years. Again, the ones you're seeing here still need to be replaced, but they're not all, if you look at the list, you'll see that it's 1 or 2 per year that we were asking for. So, I mean, there's a couple schools of thought that, you know, into replacing playgrounds, and you could do them all in one shot if you wanted to bond $1 million or $1.5 million, you know, whatever that price is, or we spread them out and phase them in like we're doing. So I chose to phase them in, and that's how they're on the chart right now.
But just to be clear,
Yeah, please.
To be clear, Anthony, you went through a pretty rigorous process because I went to the meetings and you hired consultants, you put together a master plan, you had multiple stakeholders meetings, got feedback, has taken this to Parks and Rec Commission. So, I mean, just having participated in that process, I'm not, you know, surprised by this at all. But if you weren't, you know, in those meetings, I could see how it would be surprising.
And they can't be spread out anymore, because this is $2 million worth of playgrounds when I do the quick math. Some years 4, some years 3, 4, 3.
2 million over the 10 years. Is that what you came up with?
Well, it's really $2 million from 2027 to 2029. I guess the question is, why can't they be spread out a little bit more? Where we do 1 or 2 a year? Are they in that horrible a shape?
Yes, they are.
Then what's the argument for not just bonding it and doing all $2 million in 1 year?
Honestly, I mean, you're looking at,
Horrible
we just saying half $1 billion worth of projects. I think that's what it comes down to. If you'd like to make a motion at some point when we come forward to put them all together, go for it. I fully support that. And I'm more than happy to take on that number of projects to make it happen. So,
I'll get to Mr. Curley's point. Maybe we want to ramp up the bonding right away. So that $2 million would be an easy stab. And this way we wouldn't have to worry about playgrounds for the next, 30 years or so?
5 years.
yeah, about 20 to 25 years. That's correct. And that's where these ones are now. They're at the end of their life expectancy.
Can I follow up on Mr. Walsh's point? So is there any issue for you operationally in doing a bunch of these projects in a single year? And so we'd have multiple playgrounds offline at once, and you'd have to operationally manage multiple replacements. Is that a better alternative for you? Or is it, you know, what, can you just comment on that?
Well, it poses challenges operationally to do them all at once when I have other projects. If I was putting everything else on pause and only focusing on playgrounds, yeah, it may be feasible to spread them out and I mean, a playground installation takes about a month to do, once you have the equipment in. Obviously, we, pre-ordering and everything. So sure, could I do 9 playgrounds in 9 months? Yep, that's definitely a possibility, but throw on a $4 million turf field project at Ludlow Middle School that's currently going on, or a marina replacement, dock replacement on top of all that, and it starts to get taxing on a very understaffed department already.
Thank you. Ms. Leclerc?
Could I follow up? You talked about your master plan that you recently did. Does that cover everything, like all your parks, your fields? And over what period of time would that cover?
Sure. The master plan was a comprehensive master plan, so it looked at all our parks and facilities, so well over 60 parks. We are not carrying every project that the master plan suggested that we do. The Parks and Rec Commission did try to prioritize different aspects of that plan, and that's what you're seeing on here over the next 10 years or so.
Thank you, Ms. Leclerc. Other questions on this topic or on this page, Mr. Walsh?
On the Lake Mohegan, it says concession/water park. What's the water park portion of that? Couldn't we just approve funding for a new pad that we had just replaced 2 years ago, and now we just voted on approving again? Now it's popping up again and at least part of the 350,000. I understand that you want a new concession area, but at least part of it is a water park again.
Yeah, this is different than a splash pad.
Bottom of page 5, the last item.
Oh, okay, so this is the one that's out in 2030.
Yes.
Yep. So again, long range plan we're thinking here. This is for what we would call a water park that's actually in the water at the lake. Similar to, if anybody's familiar with Brownstone up in Portland, Connecticut. It's an old quarry that has inflatables and zip lines and things of that nature where people pay, $30 a day to go and splash around on those features, those water features. So this is different than the splash pad.
So your thought is that you were gonna propose something like that at Lake Mohegan and then charge entry fees?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. How does the neighborhood feel about that?
Not sure yet. We haven't gotten to that point. Again, 2030. So I mean, we're already talking 6 years out from today.
I'd start that conversation soon.
Starting it tonight, apparently.
Excellent. Excellent. I may start the conversation and end it soon too, so.
Okay, anything else, page 5, page 6? Anything new on page?
About,
Sure.
what is Beta roadway capital improvement? I don't know what that means.
So the DPW department hired Beta, a firm that comes out and evaluates all our streets and all our sidewalks.
Yep.
And they developed a plan for the town to repave and fix some of the sidewalks. So what you see is it's split up into multiple phases based on this report that we received from Beta.
So that's primarily about 1.5 to 1.6 million dollars a year for 30 years just on sidewalks.
I'm sorry, no, it's for paving and repairing sidewalks.
Is this, did we get, I'm looking at you, John, did we get is this the one you gave us a detailed plan on? You made a separate presentation like a year or so ago on this? Yeah, okay.
That was actually almost 2 years ago. That we rolled out that plan. And I think we're in year 3 of it now. And this is just an extension of the recommendations that goal of roadway viability. The other piece of it though is that every road we touch We also try to rehabilitate the sidewalk, and we're obligated under law to. So that's a comprehensive full.
So this is paving, not sidewalks, but it may include some sidewalks if they're needed when you fix the roads. We have talked about this. And this is one that could potentially be impacted, the funding by any excess ARPA dollars that we have at the end of the year, if we have any, right? That would go against this. Okay, so we only have excess ARPA dollars of $1 million and you're showing, okay, gotcha. Mr. Curley?
Yeah, two or three lines down, you've got the sidewalk, beta sidewalk stuff. How does that?
Yeah, that was
Is that the sidewalks that
That might be the
separate report.
separate?
That's a separate report.
Another study that was done, we had data go out and every single foot of sidewalk. That is the prioritize the sidewalks. Geofence an area, not necessarily just the worst first. We go to a worst area and we fill everything in that area, just as we do.
So separate from the, okay.
And this plan was that was about a year ago that update.
You had an update a year.
And this is just repairing existing sidewalks, to be clear, not adding any sidewalks in the town. Mr. Welsh?
In this section, is there anything in this, the first four, that has anything to do with requirements of complete streets? This RTM ordinance that passed?
So there's another budget line, but these were all done prior to the.
In the next section, Jim.
Halfway down.
The answer is no, and then it's a few lines down.
Okay, so we'll talk about it when we get to that. And then Eli, on the first four, what are the inflationary amounts that you've put in?
So it's 5%. So if you see, if it's anything over 5%, we've actually added a comment on the side. So for example, Oldfield Road Bridge construction, I know I'm skipping down to the middle. It says added 5% and 10% to FY 26 and 27. So anything over 5% we've noted in the comments.
But I can make the assumption that if there's no comment about it, that you increase it by 5%.
5%, yep.
5% annual. Other questions on page 6?
Well, there's the complete streets line. Do you wanna talk about?
Yeah, I do wanna talk about the collection side. So it's $1 million in fiscal year 26. And then another $1 million in fiscal year 27.
Is the line above that also complete streets?
Yeah, you're looking at South Benson. That's a specific project that's forecasted and we have 2 years for the bonding for that. Then you have the, right above that is the townwide road safety improvements, new sidewalks, complete streets. That's $550, and then we've got 3 years out from that we've projected funds going in that direction. That's not a specific project though.
Okay, so these are accurate numbers as you calculated them recently, right? So
These
they're-
are all placeholder numbers. One of them is townwide, it's not location specific, but it's ensuring that we have funds in place to deal with to address the complete streets. And it's notated in the comments that it's a placeholder. And then the project below that is for a specific area where we have a placeholder number as well, and in the comments, it's notated that it's new and it's a placeholder. They're all placeholder figures.
Placeholders because you don't know what you're gonna be doing, or you just don't have estimates on them?
We have very conceptual on the location specific. So we've put a broader placeholder. And for the other one, we don't know specifically where yet. So we've put placeholders to ensure that there's funds available for complete streets, knowing that that's coming down the line.
But this, I'm sorry, Jim, can I follow up?
Sure.
When you say complete streets here, this sounds like this just means new sidewalks. So a new, okay.
Yeah, so the beta study was existing sidewalks, so if you have 2 existing sidewalks that don't connect.
Yep.
then this would, part of this is connecting things, and so there's nothing new. They just looked at the ones that are broken,
Sidewalks
shooting up in the
now.
air, and these will, these are connectivity sidewalks, like new sidewalks.
And it can go beyond sidewalks.
And it can go beyond.
Complete streets involves, striping,
But I
general-
guess that's my question. So complete streets, back to Jim's, is a broader concept. But based on these two descriptions, it sounds here like these two complete street projects just relate to sidewalks. Is that?
No, South Benson, Engineering, Mega has done, a preliminary design study of how to make South Benson safer. John Marsilio has spent a significant amount of time looking at South Benson. We are trying to get a survey done. I guess it's backlogged a few months, to put sidewalks in towards the end of it. But it also includes bumping out curbs, putting in median, to slow people down as they enter.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of just basically top to bottom how to make South Benson safer, because there've been a number of accidents there.
Thank you.
Top item, comma between it, so it's new sidewalks, comma, complete streets.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarity.
It also includes like traffic calming and then some safety measures. There's a big push on safe systems approach. So it has money tied in with that as well. But it's like traffic calming and narrowing intersections and doing bulb outs and stuff like that.
Kinda like you did on Round Hill Road several years ago, that concept. Near Fairfield U where you just extended out the sidewalks, you narrowed the road.
A little bit there.
slowed people down.
And Pansy Road, we narrowed down the road, Pequot Avenue, we turned a Y intersection a little bit more into a T intersection, things like that, yes.
Thank you.
So is a lot of this money, cause over the two projects, it's $7 million. Is this the requirement of this ordinance that the RTM passed? And does this cover everything the ordinance requires during this period of time? Because that was a requirement, right? When they passed that ordinance. It's not an option.
It was my ordinance, so I could.
Yeah, so you well, it's not an option. It's you have to do it.
Yeah, so there's no thing that you have to do, you have to look at it. So we have a paving plan. And in the past, pave and then maybe at some point down the line, look at that same street and maybe have to tear something up if we're gonna do something. We have a requirement now for new paving to look at whether or not we should be evaluating other options, but some of them are cheap. It doesn't tell you that you have to do a curb bump out or you have to put in a bioswale or something like that. You could look at it and say, well, we should move the lines in, or we should do, we should paint lines like, tighten the road a little bit, or we should put in, like on Reading Road, we should put in a rumble strip in the middle, which are relatively inexpensive things. So this is really, it is a bucket, TBD for some of this. We know there's pretty much unlimited things that we could do to make the town safer. And we know we can't afford to do all of them. And, it's just a bucket, an initial bucket. There's no requirement to do any one thing.
So does your ordinance allow you to just say, we don't feel like doing it because it's too expensive?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can just push it off to 2035 again or 2036?
Well,
we just can't afford it and
we can't push off evaluating. The ordinance requires us to evaluate roads because historically, we have not really looked at, we haven't evaluated roads as part of an ongoing process. It's been more reactive, if you get someone hit by a car or multiple people hit by a car or killed, then everyone, swarms to something there, but this is more proactive. So you're not putting off the evaluation. You just can't do it all at once. It would be too expensive.
Other questions on page 6, Ms. Ruggiero?
Just a quick question and follow up to that. Did you, who is our board of selectmen streets coordinator?
So we are interviewing people actually from consulting companies to play that role. So the problem we have is we're under-resourced in town. We have 2 engineers who really know a lot about streets, and they're working on bridges and tide gates and all these things. It's just not practical for them to spend all their time on complete streets. So what we're looking to do is bring someone in to help set up a structure for this and develop the right-of-way manual, which is we're required to do that in this ordinance. It's actually a lot of work, and it's really too much to ask our engineers to do, because while they have already put a lot of thought into it and they will contribute to this, there's just an amazing amount of work that needs to be helped. We need outside help for that.
Thank you. Other questions on this page, Mr. Walsh?
Somebody explain, and I'm not sure whether it's engineering or first selectman, the Rooster River 2 and these placeholders for that add up to $6.25 million. Is this on there last year? Or is this a new placeholder?
It's part of the whole Rooster River project to reduce flooding. We called phase 1, the one with the detention ponds and stuff, and ironically, I was at a meeting beforehand regarding that.
Yep.
We're getting close to getting the permits satisfied, and hopefully we can do those detention ponds this winter. Phase 2 is the town was able to get a state urban grant, and one of the things that Lynbrook neighborhood in particular were worried about is they have and we verified it with some survey that the Rooster River hasn't been cleaned out outside of the debris the last, say, 50 years. So when they did the dike project in the 60s, the bottom of the river to the top of the dike was 10 feet. Now we're finding it only to be 8 or 8.5 feet. So we are proposing with this and with that grant to remove the sediment from 1.5 feet so that we could get better conveyance. Because to raise a dike or do something like that would even be more and too much of a property. So that's what we're going for. That, some green infrastructure, and mainly it's for the soil removal, sediment removal, better conveyance of Rooster River in that area.
Yeah, sure. It says total cost is $12 million, but in here is $6.25 million.
Again, that's the phase 1 was the other part. So if you add them both together, it was 12.
Both together is 12.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Other questions on page 6? Page 7. Mr. Becker and Mr. Gerber, do you have any comments on the new items here? Maybe you can point out any new items and then we can ask questions about anything on the page.
So on page 7, the biggest change will be adding the fire station renovations. Also, there were, as I had mentioned earlier, significant adjustments in the pricing on the fire trucks as well. That's the fire trucks exceed that 5%. I think I mentioned that earlier. In some cases up to 35% annually, on our escalators, or 35% in the total project cost. And that took real world dollars now, what we know, and making sure that we bump them up. They had significantly undersized that. And I use the example on the trucks. I go to a pumper. We have 5 frontline, and then reserve. A pumper for the better part of almost a decade costs around $500,000. It only ticked up to around 600, and then in the post-COVID environment is now the next. We're currently in the process of we're soon gonna take delivery on our last sub $1 million pumper. And we fully anticipate, as you see, what's marked here as LSN 5, that'll be a 1.2 most likely $1 million piece of equipment. And the biggest driver there is fabricators and diesel mechanics, and they are harder and harder to come by. So the manufacturers, their lead time now is 3 years, not 2 years. And their prices are very expensive. So we added that, and we made sure to significantly bump those accelerators. And then the fire stations, they have just continued to fall into undersized and disrepair, and it's a problem that's faced the department better part of the last 2 decades. They've done some minor exterior and interior repairs, and they've done some things like roofs. But these are buildings that people, for lack of a better, they work 24-hour shifts, and they need to be right-sized and then put into the modern era, and to that, they need to, at that point, likely when done, they won't need to be touched for playgrounds, 25 or 30 years. But that's just never been done. So the trucks are bigger and more complex. There's more equipment. They're wedging workout spaces next to bays that used to house things that are now outside. I mean, there's so many different complexities in these buildings. So the idea was, instead of continuing to piecemeal it, we would take it head on, and we fix the problem, once and for all. So we ordered those in.
I would like, if you haven't taken a tour of the fire station, we should arrange one for the Board of Finance. It was eye-opening for me.
Is that something the board members are interested in?
$9 million, I'd like to
Yes.
see, I'd like to see what the problem is, because it's the first time this has ever been mentioned that things need to be right-sized.
Well,
ever since I've been on the.
Maybe
I would actually back.
Yeah.
I would back up on that, because when I was on the board, I consistently brought that up and at board meetings, and I'd love to go back and review the minutes, but and these summits, I practically begged both of the last, the current and prior chief to put them on, and at numerous times they did at least put some of these projects on, and then consistently strip them off for one reason or another. It has many times come up. It's just for one reason or another, administrations or those departments.
Yeah, other
I just wanna,
I'll work on a date. I think that's a great idea, and maybe we can have Jen Carpenter or someone survey the board and see what time we can do that. I think that's a great idea.
just,
Go ahead, Mr.
I was hoping to add a comment, just when I came on board in this position, there was a plan to bring in consultants and look at the fire stations. I don't know if this board ever came before this board, but to look at all the fire stations, and there was this idea that maybe we could, through eminent domain or something, take property in different parts of town and build whole new fire stations. And so when I started and I went for a tour of the fire stations, and I came to the conclusion that was never gonna happen. Like, we're not gonna take property through, I just couldn't, I thought it was a waste of time. And looking at these fire stations, they're in disrepair. I felt this study was sort of an overreach for the town, plus maybe an excuse not to actually do the work that actually needed to get done. So, what was going to be proposed was probably an astronomical, we do hear a lot that we are one fire station short up near Sacred Heart. But the idea thrown around seemed terribly impractical, like to move fire stations around town where optimal place, but you're never gonna get it done. So that's what was happening, when I came in. I kind of, I just said I'm not gonna pay for that because it didn't make any sense. I don't know if you guys ever heard that plan. You did.
I don't think the plan was presented to us. I think
We heard things
we
about
heard things about it, but I don't think we ever had it presented to us because it never made its way.
It was like hiring a guy to come in and do this work. It just really didn't make sense.
One
And
problem, it's building it out, just take one station being moved, roughly $10 million.
I mean, this was like a
You could do all.
$50 million endeavor. It just didn't, so.
Ms. Leclerc, did you have a question?
Well, that was kind of where I was going, because I don't know if it was before the meeting or in the very beginning, you were talking about giant steps. And I was wondering if that could be potentially a new firehouse. I was like,
You're gonna get hate mail today.
Kind of like putting
Yeah.
wax.
I mean, it's not a silly idea, it would require a lot of, in and out, is through a very narrow street right now, so it would require a lot of. So that's certainly, I think people have talked about like the maintenance center could be there or, because right now it's.
Yeah, if you took the 5 firehouses right now, the center of Greenfield Hill, somewhere in the north end, maybe of Black Rock Turnpike, is about the middle. They kind of call it the donut hole when they talk about it broadly. It's basically, there's a point where when you look at every single map, the current stations have the most vulnerability for how fast they can respond to, and particularly with the 2 in and 2 out OSHA guideline. So that would be your, if you were to do a 6th firehouse and do that, there was a lot of discussion,
If I could just ask, and I don't
Yeah.
wanna sound like a school teacher, but we have the overhead microphones that are picking up all the background noise. I think they might interfere with the public being able to hear the speaker. So if everyone could try to not minimize the side conversations, that'd be great. Sorry,
I thought you
David.
were gonna tell us to move on.
yeah, that's,
No,
No, and-
it's disruptive because of the way the microphones are, so.
and I would say, and I would say that, to Mr. Walsh, and obviously, I mean, I've shown it a long time, I'm quite passionate on this issue. I'm probably the only one in the room that has worked out of and slept in every one of these firehouses. And even since that time, they've only gone downhill. I think that a tour of all of them, a comprehensive view on the costing and the plans for what this would look like, and getting everybody really up to speed on that would be helpful. I think what the first selectman brought up, coming into office, was he was presented really with this station study, which had a driving element of looking at least replacing 1 or 2 of the stations. An outlying firehouse, even just a 2-bay firehouse right now being replaced, sited and built, is like I mentioned, it's estimated in the $8 to $10 million range, and that's assuming that you can, get a piece of land or have a piece of land, and then it's optimally placed, and that's pretty complex. For $9 million, all 5 firehouses get top to bottom renovations, with minor, we're going one of them having an actual expansion to it. And you open up space, you modernize for concerns that we have about that we have female firefighters in the building and new complexities there. We have many. We have as a town, a responsibility from a personal protective equipment. You used to just take your turnout gear and leave it next to your bunk and get in it and go. Now you go to a fire, you're supposed to decontaminate it in a segregated area where we're not in compliance and all those things. There's many different, pieces to that. We've moved gyms into the firehouses that didn't used to exist. We used to have the firefighters go to the YMCA on I think 3 days a week crisscrossing around town. It's less wear and tear on the trucks for them to do that, but that takes up space. There's more specialized equipment, all of those pieces of equipment and additional spare equipment takes up bay space that we don't have, so we're parking some of this equipment outside. That causes it to age more frequently. So I think we can really look at trying to more bring that forward. But for the purposes of tonight, that is a major, change. But it finally puts it there and concretely says this is something that we're looking at.
Mr. Chair, I just had a couple questions. The fire department or the firehouse that had a fire in it last year or is it
In one
this year?
kitchen, correct?
Yes. Didn't that just get redone? Like, is that part of this plan?
That was just the kitchen in that smaller. So we're looking at whether or not that kitchen would remain in place or as part of a broader renovation. If the kitchen had to be moved, that might be a different story. I
And-
can't answer that firmly.
I would love to do the tour, but just adding this up quickly, it looks like all these projects for the fire department equal roughly like $24 million.
It's about, I believe it comes out to
For the
12
trucks
point-
as well.
No, all the different.
Well, if you're talking about the trucks,
I'm talking about the houses, the trucks, the various things. We got on page 5, $1 million.
that's, back in the napkin, that's probably accurate if you include the trucks.
Yeah. And then for the police, they have about 3 million, 5, maybe 4 million. Is the same evaluation being, like, how was this plan, this seems to me, and I'm a huge supporter of obviously first responders both, but I mean, it seems very fire heavy versus like, did the chief have his say in what he would desire? Like, what was the process?
Totally different, arrangement, because we have, many firehouses with very big trucks, whereas the police, don't, they're in their cars, so, but we do at some point have to grapple with, headquarters, that's their facility, the one, their headquarters.
So why isn't that made, I'm just curious,
No,
because
there-
when
it-
the chief came, he talked about the locker room and like all
on
these
here.
different things.
Yeah, that's in here.
It is on-
3 million?
It is on there. There are initial placeholder numbers. They're in the process of.
You might tell me which page? I might have-
You're on
7.
page 7, second up from the bottom, and actually, and Eli can speak further on that because he's
Oh,
the
yeah, that's the
project
one
manager
too,
that's
and there's
been
a
assigned to
300.
it. Exactly, and we're using currently the ARPA funds to do a partial with the bathroom renovation
Locker room,
piece.
Yeah. I remember.
Yeah, it's and so and you wanna dive in, cause you're doing the
Yeah.
bathroom section?
Part of the ARPA funds will allow us to bring the whole police department renovation requests up to construction documents. Also part of the ARPA is to renovate, which will be going out to bid very shortly, is to renovate 2 bathrooms down in the basement for the PD. That will allow swing space for when we actually renovate their locker rooms, so then they can use showers down in the basement. So that's all coming out of ARPA. This 1.2 million is for the construction coming out of that construction documents. And we have a note in here that says we will be pursuing a professional estimate once we come near construction documents. We will come to you with a better number.
So I guess so the chief has had his front addressed.
Absolutely, yes.
And the way to think about it, I guess, from what I'm gathering you're saying, is they basically have one house where the fire department has 10 or.
And their vehicles are
And-
very different.
Yeah, and very different types of space, and the police department has, I would say over the years, it's actually a newer building overall, though it's aging, it's a newer building, and it has had, some buckets of money applied to it, but it's very different, but this addresses the chief's concerns and basically is collapsing, and this comes from when the Board of Finance actually had said slow down and go back and be more comprehensive. It collapses all that as well.
Meaning
So it'll be one
comprehensive project.
We're gonna do
instead of-
one, exactly, we're gonna do one comprehensive project, bring that up to where the chief has recommended. We're evaluating their training, and our EOC is Emergency Operations Center's house in that space. We're evaluating that as well and making sure that again, we go in and we don't have to go back for a long time. They don't have the truck needs, but they every year get funds for their cars, so they have budgeted and they have the revolving account that they pull for their vehicles. So, you know, they get at least 10 vehicles a year replaced, so it's a little bit, it's
Apples and oranges.
completely apples and oranges, but we're making sure to address both of their needs. The mobile command that we projected out further, which we are trying to seek grant dollars for instead, we believe that will ultimately probably be able to be a grant type opportunity. So we put a little bit further out, but that is also marked as PDFD because that's shared by fire, police, emergency management, as it is. So,
And just when we're doing these things, similar to when we talked about the playgrounds where you have the downtime, what happens, like, are the people displaced in that house while it's being renovated? How does that get factored in?
So there's a few different ways to do that in these stations. And again, I wouldn't want to give you a firm, we're doing this way at this interval. But I can tell you that at times where we've done the last time any sort of, it was moving across a bay that was being widened. We moved one truck to another station and they responded out of there, and they did that for, it was about 6 months. So you have options along those lines, but we would try to minimally disrupt that through the process, because one of the key factors for the fire department is that the trucks are strategically placed throughout town. So you would want too long to have an entire truck too far out of their normal responding area, so we have to address that. But there's ways to phase building construction to minimize that.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh?
This fire department funding seems to be so condensed over like 5 years. One of the years, 2028, it's slightly over $5 million worth of costs, all in 1 year. Why wouldn't it be spread out more over the year? Because if you then look at the rest, there's really not a lot there. Why wouldn't it just be spread out more?
Most of these projects probably should have been done 15 years ago.
Why are we spending, we've never really done a pumper where we spread it over 2 years. In 26 and 27, you're taking one pumper and you're spreading it out over 2 years. While in this, because in 27, we also have another rescue vehicle for $1,650,000, which we've never really done more than one fire truck in 1 year. We specifically have asked the fire department to specifically budget it, so that does not happen. And they have worked with the Board of Finance on making that happen.
So the lead time on the vehicle now is 3 years. It used to be 2 years. On some of these vehicles, they actually end up longer than that. Something like a rescue vehicle, a heavy rescue vehicle is a much more complex vehicle for them to build. We are going to go back. I mean, this is making some adjustments in both cash flow and timing and potential approval timing. So if a rescue is projected to be replaced 3 years from now, you would normally wait 1 year. In this instance, if you want to keep the plan in place and get it in that third year, you're actually gonna have to ask for it. You have to ask for it for approval purposes sooner. From a payment standpoint, and we are working through this, we do expect some of these figures to change. One of the things we're working to clarify, particularly as we have been working more to standardize which brand vehicle. We used to go out and only go to the low bidder, and we'd end up with frankly, we end up with a lot of problematic fire trucks. And as they get more and more complex, it has become even more and more problematic. So we are trying to standardize which we purchase, and they're being purchased off of consortium bids, so it fully meets the purchasing guidelines, and we're getting better end results. So one of the things that we've asked the fire department to do is go and find out, what are our options? Can we pay for it, we may be able to pay for part of it up front and get a discount on the vehicle. They may ultimately just wanna take a final payment on it, or a down payment and a payment when we go to take delivery. So we are trying to, we're trying to clarify work through the numbers of what the best bang for our buck is, and then how we would match that with our approval process and then actual bonding needs. So for now, these are placeholders. They're best, it's somewhat fluid as it changes, but.
Why is the first pumper vehicle $1.2 million, and then the next one is $2.2 million? What's so special about that second one that is worth $1 million more?
It's not. The first one is 1.2.
Yep, the bottom one, and
then you have a firehouse, then you have the apparatus maintenance facility, then you have a rescue, and then you get LSN 16, which is the next pumper, and it goes to 1.495. You then go to a firehouse, and then you go to the next pumper, which is LSN 17, which is 168. And then you go to a tower ladder, and then you go to a firehouse, and then the next pumper down is 2160.
yeah, so how does it go to 2.160?
We're using, that involves a 35% escalator. Again, they're getting exponentially year over year, far exceeding the normal standard rate of inflation expensive.
Yeah, but you have to understand, I mean, I think we've seen this all across, and I've asked DPW on some of these projects and Bucky on some of these projects. You had the Biden administration with ARPA flood this country with money that everyone's using. Some communities are choosing to buy fire trucks. Perfectly legitimate expense under ARPA. But what happens? The price goes up. Everything's inflationary because there's so much money flooded into the system. That can't last forever.
So I would ask, perhaps from the board, at the last meeting, there was a concept of putting a 2x factor on all of our numbers. And this actually takes into account essentially a 2x factor, but with a quantified based on best available information right now. If there's a desire not to put those types of heavier escalators, we're more than happy to roll those back. But we are trying to be much more cautious in our future projections so as not to find ourselves in
And this is a 2032 number, so
we are, yeah, that
I get it.
can change.
Why isn't there any trucks after 2032? We're just not gonna buy trucks? Because we always had a prediction of what was gonna happen in the future, and the chief would run through that. There's never 3 years ever where there was never a purchase of a truck, ever.
We plan on continuing to purchase trucks. This was the existing plan that they have, and us putting the escalators on those plans. They have a long range plan, update their long range plan and then add those in as it's the
So
outline.
this may add something to 2035.
Absolutely going to add as in those outlying years.
Okay.
And
Well, possibly $6 million that's missing out of the waterfall.
Well, no, hang on, and I don't wanna get too hung up, and I mean, I think we all know these out years are kinda who the heck knows, but if 3 years from 2032 would be 2035, right? So that would be just one that we're missing at God knows what cost.
3 years where we're not buying a truck.
Yeah, so in the last year, we would put, am I seeing this wrong? We'd need one in 2035, right?
33, 34, 35.
Yeah, so put.
This takes what the fire department had in place
Okay,
estimate that, and in those outlying years, we know we have, if you look at the total, we have capacity. We plan on adding those. This plan
doesn't have it yet.
doesn't have that.
Okay, I would also,
Advise them that we need it.
That's,
Yeah, we need it, because if we're doing these waterfalls out 10 years, if we wanna have a proper capital plan, well, they have a duty to upgrade their truck purchase.
we've asked
can I,
for.
and David, I'm sorry, I don't wanna cut you off, we're almost done here. I think, I don't think anybody believes that this plan 10 years out is real, cause this shows us going up and up and up and then plummeting. The reason it's plummeting is we just haven't identified we don't know what we're gonna know 5 or 6 years from now. That's what always happens, right? The things that get added on the front end. So I would agree, make sure that if there's something missing in here, it gets in. But I guess I would just caution everyone that, I think it's important that we have a 10-year plan so that we see what's in front of us, but I'm not putting a lot of stock in these numbers in the back half of this, because we will identify new issues, I'm sure. But Mr. Walsh's point is taken. If there is something in their long-range plan that's not in here, it should be updated.
It just concerns me, Madam Chairwoman, that in some of these later years, when we're pushing up against the 10%, are they gonna be like asking for a bunch more money and a bunch more to the buildings? Like $3 million.
I'm sure stuff will come up. That's my point. I have no illusion that on the Board of Ed side or the town side, that we will stop needing capital projects, in these out years, so. All right, the last page is page 8. Any questions? Thank God we don't have the Board of Ed tonight. The last page is page 8. Any questions on this?
I mean, some of these are worth talking about, although I talked about a couple of them.
Yep.
Pilot House will be out at the end of this coming March. Anthony Calabrese is already, he can go in and come up with a plan prior to that. This involves internal and external renovation for the ball field as well as the playground there as well. But on the inside, if Anthony, if you wanna just give a high level overview of the types of things you're looking at.
Yeah, basically the inside of that facility right now is a built out gymnasium that needs to be completely renovated. The thought is to try to get a program in there that has roughly a 3/4 size gymnasium or multi-purpose space with 4 to 5 classrooms, while keeping the entire building or making the entire building fully ADA accessible. As Bill mentioned, the plan outside on the exterior would be to make the playground and all abilities playground all inclusive, and then to convert the small T-ball field that's there now into a miracle field, again making it fully accessible, to try to tie that whole property into what we're doing with this adaptive community center.
Thank you. Other highlights on this page?
Another highlight from my standpoint is the old Giant Steps building, which is completely a placeholder. We don't know whether that building is really salvageable yet, but hopefully we'll hear soon. I think we have
Structural engineer looking at.
we have a structural engineer who's providing a report.
Do we have questions on that one?
Yeah.
Have you guys thought about maybe moving, even if it's a new building, moving the Board of Ed there? And selling the condo that we have, that we're not having to pay Class A office space and the maintenance fee that comes along with it? I mean, we have an investment in there. I'm sure the landlord doesn't love having a condo as part of his commercial real estate. He's in the rental business. He's not into selling condo units, which is what we have. Taking that money back and putting it into a building, especially if we have land available for it, and one of their programs is right across
across the driveway.
That has been one of the things that we've heard, one of the comments we've heard that we should look at that, yeah.
Okay.
Just a follow-up on this, I know it's a placeholder, does that include any sort of site work in terms of new access road to the site?
Correct, yeah, it does.
Ms. Ruggiero?
Giant Steps, is that the building that the RTM toured a couple of years ago before we bought it, or what is Giant Steps?
Well, we toured both, but we toured St. Emery's, which is near the Firestone, behind, is that what you're thinking of?
There was a building with.
By Mill House.
I was on,
Abandoned
toured that.
building on-
Yeah, that's what
Oh, yeah, we toured that as
And then
well.
there's a building that was being used that had like children's equipment in it.
Yeah.
There's that building that looks like it's like,
Enjoy it, Amy.
That's the building.
It's the building.
the one that looks like it's like missing a wall and it's got big.
Yeah.
Yeah, the abandoned building, that's this one that's.
Surrounded by a chain link fence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can rent it out for that, maybe for this.
Actually, I think someone did do their senior video there or something. But so the question is, I mean, preliminary look at that was that actually the structure is sound. It's a big structure.
Piece that has walls, you mean?
No, I think all the walls are intact.
You mean the foundation and the.
There's windows that are missing.
Windows, yeah.
So a structural engineer has been out there twice now to give us a report on the building, both structurally and in addition to what he thinks could be done with the building, meaning if we wanted to take a floor out, if we wanted to open up one of the main floors, if that's all possible. So we toured the building with the structural engineer and James Ryan about a week ago. What I can say is the building has been, teenagers have gotten into the building. They've lit fires in the building, so it has become a lot worse than when you guys seen it, I'm sure. They've destroyed all toilets, they've destroyed all sinks, everything's broken into. So there's a security system there now that we have in place. So hopefully we can figure out what we're going to do with that.
What was that building and before?
Seminary,
Seminary.
It was something with priests.
Yeah, okay.
All I know is seminary.
It was a school.
It was very scary, even back then, so now it's gotten worse.
It's a teenager's dream as it stands right now.
We own the land and the building and everything, so it gives us a pretty big space.
The town-
How many acres is that?
It's some of it's protected, right? But
Back,
There's open, yeah, there's wetlands, and abutting wetlands, but we've been exploring, even, a different access road and options around it. There are some options, so this is a placeholder.
Well, I'm glad that's in there, cause I think we'd hate to have it continue to be neglected and just lose the opportunity to,
And if anything, I think we'd have to pay to knock it down. It's gotta be
Yeah.
dangerous. I would think it's a hazard, honestly.
yeah, that's
I've heard
if
stories, I've seen pictures of it from my
Yeah, and-
teenage son.
And to that, we've
And people
added,
make TikToks, it's a scary place.
to the point, security with a video element, it's a monitor, it goes back to Sonatrol, so that was after we toured it a couple of months back and went, wait a minute, and you're telling me that this is boarded and no one's watching at all, so we've increased that so that if something happens on the site, just from a risk perspective, a little bit better, but something's gotta get done with it, cause someone's gonna.
Oh, yeah.
So if it turns out the structure is worthless, then and it has to get knocked down, I mean, one way or the other, we should use that property, so I know Anthony would like to put in some fields there, soccer fields or something. We probably could do both, we could probably use the building and put in a soccer field, so it's TBD right now.
And I thought at one point we're gonna talk about the Board of Ed on Thursday, but have they explored, I thought there was a consideration, cause I thought the one piece that was viable, the building the one side that we saw.
That's the alternative high school.
Yes, that's being used by
Yeah.
them. Do they have another use possibly for that other structure? Because as they talk about.
I think they have enough room.
Other things, is there a possibility to use that for?
It's not currently in their plans, we did suggest to them to take a look at it, we mentioned even their early childhood. For a variety of reasons, it currently isn't, but.
I can't imagine why they don't want it.
Well,
scare the hell out of us.
Do you wanna touch on the town hall?
Yeah, so town hall renovation, here, I actually don't know if we're still moving in that direction. I mean, this is the original
This is,
build out, right,
this
behind.
is the original to actually, to expand Sullivan Independence Hall. We've left that in as placeholder dollars now, although largely in that we have not gotten to a point of fleshing out dollars and timeline and what we're looking at, but we are attempting to come up with a plan that does not expand Sullivan, and it's significantly less expensive, probably a little bit more near term, and focusing on reconfiguring Old Town Hall, Sullivan, and doing that, but not even at the point yet of being able to conceptually place dollars, so we wanted to leave this in.
And this is several years, so that's fine. Okay, we still have to get to the WPCA, by the way, guys, so any questions on this page?
What's the Turner property renovation? What's this idea? This placeholder for an
Okay.
future project.
Yeah, so we've made some headway with that property recently. The Army has contacted us, well, I contacted them, hunted them down, they finally, after months of trying to figure out where we are on this, they said, well, there's one more test in August that hopefully if the groundwater is okay, then we can start the process of turning it over to you, because they're responsible for the outside. We're responsible for the inside. So we haven't been in, do an assessment, but most likely there's going to be asbestos. And certainly, we haven't determined the use for it yet. There would be, if we wanna use it for whatever, there's gonna be a build out cost for that. So initially, we're gonna have a fair amount of cleanup, we think. And that's all on us.
Curly?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. We skipped over I hope Anthony's still on. We skipped over the two Parks and Rec line items, for Jennings and Doug Yellow. I'm just curious to hear from Anthony a little bit about what those are.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Those were two projects from our master plan that we did in 2022 that the Parks and Rec Commission would like to move forward. Just some high level things that, an overview of them. The Jennings Beach master plan includes a new food truck area, kind of where that little island is in front of the concession stand building, revamped parking, and then an expansion of where the Sandcastle playground is, actually making that more of a green area, potentially adding a splash pad in that same area, and then again making the walkway from that playground area to the beach much more defined.
But it's not a renovation or redo of the concession stand itself.
No, it's not.
And then Doug Yellow?
Yep, that would include exploring a second softball field and some other site renovations up there, whether it's a dog park or increasing, adding a playground there, or
Just, the first section is all projects, the first section is all projects, that's all projects that have already been approved.
Yeah.
So you may see in 27 and 28, bonding amounts, but that's, the years to do the bonding. You'll notice that, and this is typical for the WPCA, they don't have anything in sub 1 million, so you're mostly focusing on the second half of the page, which is WPCA capital over $1 million, so it goes from that page and then down to the partially on page 13. And you'll notice at some of these items, we've added contingency factors, so that's probably the biggest change. There's 25% contingency added to most of these larger projects for them. And that's available, and what happened most recently with them, just trying to cover us for now. But other than that, a lot of this work, this is right out of plans and.
Yeah, when we when we went through the approval for the first, bond authorizations, these were all on the page. I think we sort of talked through all of these, so if there's anything that people don't recognize or wanna talk through a little bit more, but this is all part of the consultant's plan, just with some escalators.
And you'll notice in the 26, a bunch of these projects going for bond money, but that's also largely to do sign piece and then come back. So that gets the seed money running. But yeah, largely this I've seen in the past with any drastic changes.
But our expert on WPCA is sitting right over there.
And she stands 100% behind these numbers. None of them will change.
Thank you.
We have a guarantee from Selectwoman Vitale. Any questions? Wow, John, that was.
If you have
Any questions?
Well, we gotta challenge Michelle, she's new here, you gotta ask her one question.
Ask Michelle something.
Ms. Ruggiero?
We're gonna talk more about the as we talked about with the WPCA, we're gonna talk more about, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah, so we talked, maybe not the project, more about the financing and how that gets split, absolutely.
And getting, using resources to get grants, all that stuff, we're gonna.
I have a question.
Mr.
We talk about the sewer infrastructure being it's close to 75 years old. The stuff that's actually on this waterfall, do we know like how much, what percentage of the oldest infrastructure this starts to really clean up? Is it all of it or 75% of it, or anybody know?
Of the WPCA?
Yeah.
So the best.
The collector system, I guess is what you're referring to.
The whole thing, right?
Yeah, we've had many conversations about how the infrastructure was all built right after the Second World War, right? It's late 40s, 1950s, all 75 years old. So like by the time we get to 2032, how much of that, what percentage of that oldest stuff have we refurbished?
So if you're talking about the plant itself, then we probably have a really temporary and
Could you speak up a little? I'm sorry.
I said, if you are talking about the plant.
Yeah.
When this program is completed, it will probably be a rehabilitated plant. It'll be good for
Plant's done.
25 years. For the collector system, we're just stopping the bleeding. This is a maintenance issue like paving, like a whole array of other items that have to be continually addressed. Pipes fail over time. Not every single one of those pipes were put in at the same time. They were all put in at different times, and consequently, they failed at different times. So that's going to be a constant source of vigilance that we have to deal with. So the plant is easier, it's more discreet.
But you picked, for the plan that you developed, you sort of picked, there was like what, a rating of like 1 to 4 or something, of like 4s being the worst, I can't remember. And you picked really the 3s and 4s, initially, so were there some things that have some life left in them, so.
But as we go through this plan, those things will emerge as items that have to be addressed. And Michelle has already, in her short time here, identified issues at the plant that are significant that we're going to have to deal with. And you'll see, we have budgeted $500,000 for MEP structural. That's merely a structural engineer coming in and doing an evaluation of all the concrete tanks and all of that. So what comes out of that is going to be a budget item. Everything else that's there, for it.
What John is referring to is just the total project cost of $4 million, structural and MEP. There's seed money coming, $250 this year, for them to be able to evaluate what exactly needs as a placeholder. On page 12.
Other than the structural, show me the line items that have anything to do with the plant.
I'm trying to figure out what total amount
$7 million.
One has already been approved, and so now it's and plant equipment programs and has
Right now, we're triaging what has been identified to us by word and current assessment that was. We are so though, we're triaging what was identified as the highest priority.
Okay.
And then we're going to move forward with the lower of the highest priority and then move forward.
So what's the total amount for the plant rehabilitation?
Right.
Total of all these costs.
right now.
Yeah.
We've got programs. The order and current valuation added up to 32 million. So we did two more critical identified categories. So there's still a third category in the order and current evaluation that was it could wait. And so we're letting it wait, but that's 3 or 4 years out, but we're gonna have to do that. So beyond that, what Michelle came to me and identified, and she's an engineer. She said, you know, there's large cracks in these settling tanks. So that's not good. So that's and we identified the fact that we need structural evaluation just for that. And we have engineering money in here to do that. That's structural cracks and other mechanical, electrical, and plumbing items. The building, and so we have placeholders for that.
Of $18 million.
No.
Oh, no, just the MEP and structural.
That's
$4 million.
TBD. Yeah.
It was placeholder of the $3,750,000 for
Yeah.
MEP. That's in year 35, 35.
Might be earlier.
The 250 coming in 26. And then placeholder, new placeholder, $1,750,000 in fiscal year 35.
So once we have the evaluation, we'll need to come before you will get it might be with that. I suspect it will.
In the settling tanks, are only one piece.
Sure.
That is requiring this structural integrity test there.
And then I see more money for I&I in several spots, right?
Yeah.
And then we also were putting $45 million.
That's one of the key spots.
Okay.
And that is what we're calling phase 5.
Sure.
When we're done with that, we're gonna be doing a phase 6. This is all catch-up money.
Well, everything here's catching.
Yeah.
Since I never saw one of these things funded for 15 years. Not one of these pieces of equipment was ever funded for 15, 20 years. When do you think that we'll see less flow because of it? when are we gonna see the results of the money spent? Like, how long?
So, for you to know.
Yeah.
We are doing a baseline study of the East Trunk. There is a big suspicion that the East Trunk being by the water courses over there, and being on piles and being tidally influenced, that that post the completion of that line, that there'll be a significant drop in flow. Crossing that thing. The other line that we are going to put seed money into the design is upstream from that, all the way up the Rooster River to, it goes to Mountain Grove Cemetery. And that whole line takes 2/3 of the whole town. Okay, so we're doing the front end of it. We're going to design the continuation of it. And that's something we're gonna put on the shelf, and we've talked about this, that's a significant program. That would be $30-50 million, that's something that we really have to chase for federal funds. Project of that, that dent, because there's lots of money on the federal level where they don't even look at anything under $25 million, they don't bother with that. That's for other pots of money, but clean water money, things like that, there's money out there, but you have to have something on the shelf to say, look, here's what we need. So that's what we're doing. WPCA has bought monitoring units, at least 13 of them. They're manhole covers that have flow meters attached to them. We have them all over town, but we have two, one after the East Trunk project, and as soon as that's done, now that's an 18-month project, we're gonna evaluate that, and we're gonna see just where we are in I&I.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask an I&I question? So just remind us, so we have I&I in the WPCA operating budget, as I recall. There's some amount of money, $1 million, $2 million.
It's a special charge.
But it's part of the annual operating, okay, and I don't remember how much it is, I thought it was a couple of.
It was 7,000.
Okay,
The year before that, it was 7,400.
okay, so some small amount. I thought that the fund balance for the WPCA was being built up and was going to be expended on I&I projects. So how does that align with this plan? And what is the thinking around using the fund balance? I don't even know what the balance is. Is it 15 million or something? You know,
15 to 17.
17, okay. What is the thought process around that, and how does that fit into, you know, this whole, I mean, I&I, maybe that's broader term, but what are we doing there?
So let me just say this. I examined the I&I budgets from 2009 till present. And every year there was $300,000 or $400,000 budgeted.
Yep.
9 or 10 out of those years, 0 was spent. That money went into fund balance. They just budgeted it.
Didn't do anything.
Never used it. One year they used 80% of it, that was if they went at a break or something, I don't know. So there has been this constant benign neglect for all the components of the system, but especially the I&I, because that taxes the plant, because you're introducing effluent you shouldn't have to. So anyway, my answer to you is that 17 million is probably reflective of a lot of budgeting of programs that were never ever done. The 17 million is only used two ways: pay for projects and then they run out of money, or to mitigate rate increases.
Okay.
So that is a policy decision. That's certainly not my role. And that should be an item of discussion.
I think for the WPCA board as well, right? I mean, cause I think your point there, yeah, if all these projects are approved, and if the current thinking about how much of this will be absorbed by the WPCA comes to pass, I don't know what impact that has on the rates, but I guess you could do one of two things. You either pay for it out of the fund balance, or you leave that fund balance down over time to smooth out the rate increases, so that's
Or with the fund balance, that's it.
well, same thing, yeah, same
I
thing,
think it's
so yeah.
part of a broader discussion.
It either reduces the rates over time, you use that, or you apply a chunk of it, cause in the past, we've had discussions, and I don't remember where we ended up on this, but at one point, there was an initial discussion where a whole project was gonna be paid for out of fund balance, and then, the decision was made to bond it instead. There was a concern about using the fund balance, so yeah, just philosophically, that's probably something to think about. I thought the number in the operating budget was higher than that, and I did not realize we've been budgeting all these years and not using the money. I thought that the fund balance was getting built up systematically through some of these other fees that were charged and just through the rate structure itself, but and I guess that's part of it too. But that's good to know, okay.
Yeah, though there's an specific
Yeah.
INI fee that they charge.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions? I know it's late. All right, well, I wanna thank, I think this was a really good meeting. I thank the administration for all the work they put into this. Like I said, I'm glad we have it on a separate evening. Thank you again, Eli, everyone, John, the whole team, and I will make a, Sabrina. Oh,
She's still on the call.
Sabrina has done a phenomenal job with this. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Second, Mr. Curley, all in favor? All right, good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Big crowd.